Tuesday, February 2nd, 2016. We are gathered in the City Center Conference Room at 351 West Center in Provo, Utah. This meeting is recorded and will be posted to the Provo City website. Please be aware that the microphones are on the table and do pick up noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that the recordings can pick up side conversations. We'll begin with the roll call. Mr. Parker, please start.
Wayne Parker, George Stewart, Gary Winterton, Dave Knacht, Dave Hardy, Kate Angren, Dave Sewell,
Kim Santiago,
Matt Taylor,
Louise Jorgensen.
The opening prayer will be offered by Bryce Lumper of the Homeless Minutes.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for this day and grateful for the opportunity we have to gather at the council work session. We pray that Thy Spirit may be present and that we may be able to glean much from this meeting. We're grateful for the leaders of our city, and we pray that Thou bless them with Thy Spirit to assist in guidance and the direction setting for our city. We are grateful for the liberties which we enjoy, which this land provides for us. We pray that Thou will help us to maintain those and to be in Thy good graces. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Moultrie. If there are any questions about the meeting minutes, entertain those now. Any corrections?
I don't have a question about the meeting minutes, but I will see if I can make a request. I have really appreciated over the last couple of years that we've had the chair notes where we've had more than one sheet of paper. If it's possible, I like that so that I can flip through these in and I can write my notes on that piece of paper for each item that comes up on that area. It's better than just a one sheet for me.
Okay.
Is that possible? We can do that.
We'll do that for future meetings.
Are there others? Okay.
Okay. We'll make some copies right now.
It just helps me as I go through each item, and then I might write my notes right off to the side.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Okay, so December 1st, 2015 work meeting minutes, December, and also the council TMAC joint meeting minutes.
And I made the correction you asked.
Okay.
But it's not
it was
on.
just Mr. Walters, sorry, David Walter, just a correction of the spelling of his name. That was the only correction for the minutes. So if there are no other questions, we'll look for a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. Second, Mr. Winterton. All in favor? Yes, unanimous and affirmative. Thank you, Liz. Our first item of business is a discussion regarding a proposed resolution appropriating $97,000 in the Engineering Capital Improvement Fund for lighting and landscape improvements on 300 South, applying to the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2016. This will be presented by John Borgett, our Director of Administrative Services.
Yes, happy to. We have Dave Graves who's here as well, but we're getting ready and we're in the process of doing some improvements on 300 South. And there's an interest to do some enhancements to basically the land, the lighting. It's going to be putting up some new lighting that will match up with the lighting that was done on South State Street. And so that's what the $97,000 would be used for, as well as some landscape improvements. And it's coming out of fund balance in the engineering CIP. And where that $97,000 came from is we just recently sold some property to the church adjacent to the temple. Just a small parcel that was $97,000, and so that money was put into the engineering CIP, and then we're coming to the council with the recommendation to appropriate it for these lighting improvements. And so I can answer any question that has been duly noticed, and want to have a discussion here, and I know there's some discussion about possibly doing it 2 weeks from today or tonight. I'm not sure what the direction is, but I can answer any questions.
We would typically discuss it at a work session and then have time to, you know, address any issues or questions, and then have it in the regular session or the regular council meeting 2 weeks later. But entertain any questions for Mr. Morgan. Do you have questions for him?
Yeah, just so this is a UDOT project in general. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. They have budgeted for lighting and landscaping, but we're requesting an enhancement. So they're saying that's fine, but you have to pay the difference. Is that the situation here?
Yes, I don't know if you add anything more to that, Dave.
Yeah, so we've been working with the project team for probably a year and a half on this project, and we're working through that. You know, we working with the neighbors that had a desire to, you know, to try to improve the look along that corridor, make it more pedestrian friendly, and so we're able to get UDOT to include with that project an 8-foot sidewalk pedestrian trail, bicycle trail along the north side of the corridor, with a 5-foot landscape planter between the roadway and the trail. When they came back initially, they said, you know, if the city wants those kind of things, you're going to have to come in and, you know, and pay some betterments as part of that project. In this current fiscal year budget, we budgeted $400,000 for the estimate that we had on the enhancement at that time. That included much of the landscaping and some property acquisition around 400 East where there was a little bit of widening that needed to be done. As they got their design a little bit more refined, they came back and said, okay, our design includes the UDOT standard highway lighting. Okay. And, you know, as we started looking at that, it's like, well, really, our vision, I think, from the city is that this will be a continuation of the South State Street Trail into the Denham County area of the city. And so the additional money that we're requesting right now is to use the same lighting that has kind of the dual fixture like we put on South State Street. It required a few additional lights, but basically it was just the difference between the fixture. And, you know, so that's what this appropriation is requesting.
Other questions for Mr. Gordon or Mr. Graves? So this is on our tonight's meeting, or is it scheduled for 2 weeks?
It was originally scheduled for tonight, but I know there was some meeting that maybe want to give council members a chance to look over it, so we can. I think it'll work either night, whatever is best for the council, whatever you prefer to do for your process.
Okay. Is there a preference?
That's an objection. That's what I think. And normally we like the 2-week process, so if we have questions, but it's pretty quick, open and shut. I'm okay with that.
All right, thank you. The next item of business is a follow-up discussion on council priorities and our vision for the city. And this will present this item. We were able to, thanks to Mr. Parker, we're able to organize ourselves, our priorities in a way that was a little easier to present to staff and to the administration, I think, ultimately. And then Mr. Harding came in our last meeting with a better template for doing that. And so all of our goals and priorities were put into that template. And I don't know if we have those where we can put them up on the screen, the priorities in the template that we've used. But each council member was able to put those goals and priorities into the template. We were able to look at them, make suggestions, and then Ryan Hardy put those into a sort of a drag and drop survey for all the council members, and council members were able to then prioritize 1 through 25 from most important to maybe lesser important. And we have the results of our combined, is that correct? So
Yeah.
we have the results of our combined ranking of our priorities. And this may be something that we can discuss. We can look at the rankings, we can see if it matches up to what we think is appropriate for the council for this year. We'd love to have just a really good open discussion about where we're at with those. And I just have to say I'm really excited and happy that we're getting our priorities set at the first of the year. I think it's going to help us tremendously throughout the year. It'll help our staff understand where to place time and priority, and it will also help the administration to know what's important to the council. And then after we're done with this discussion, we will, the next item is to see where we align with the mayor's goals. He was able to share his goals with us at the retreat, at his retreat, and then now that we're hoping after this session, this discussion, we will have our priorities ranked, and then we'll have something that we can discuss with the mayor, see where we align with some of his goals. Look forward to being able to do the work of the people in collaboration with our administration and move these forward. I'm just really excited about the process. So.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
That's okay. Did anyone have any concerns about the drag and drop survey? Was that pretty?
It was easy to do, but I saw so much interrelation between some that were on top and some that were lower. And to actually put those in an order, well, part of it was a challenge for me to do that.
I agree. I felt the same way, and so some things that were, some things that were really important were at the top, and some things that were related might have been at the bottom because I felt the other thing addressed that issue. So I found myself in the same position.
So this is the template, and this is the result of the survey.
Those are the results. Okay. Let's look at the results. Mr. Harvey, did you want to present the results?
Yeah, I can talk about it real quick. I don't have much, but just point out a few things. So I sent this all to you. There's 2 tabs. One tab is just called the raw numbers. So when you go to that one, you can just see, budgeting priorities was answer number 1 for 2 people. Answer number 2, you kind of go through that. But this is a summary of it, and I put them in order from the mean, the lowest mean to the highest. You can see the minimum value, the maximum value, and then the deviation. That just, for those that don't know, that just kind of shows if there's general agreement or not. So the lower number that it shows on standard deviation, the higher the agreement for that particular spot. And so that's about it. You can kind of see the order there and where you have agreement and where you don't. So, unless you have any other questions. Pretty simple.
Other questions for Mr. Harvey? So this is 1 through 25.
Copy? Do you want me to print this out? Yeah, I'd like one. Yeah. Sure.
So this is 1 through 25, how it shakes out from our top priority to our lowest priority. And I don't know if we want to have any discussion about, everybody had the sheets, right? So that we can look at what that priority meant, because it's hard just from the little, title to know exactly. So I felt like those sheets were really helpful to describe what each of those meant. So zoning compliance was number 1. Maybe we go to zoning compliance. And the priority was to increase zoning compliance in the city of Provo. And if you go down to the desired outcomes, if you can scroll down a little bit. desired outcomes were to reduce negative impacts from zoning noncompliance, to have viable and stable areas for family housing where people live for generations, closing of loopholes that allow noncompliance, resident satisfaction with zoning ordinances and enforcement, improved physical environment, enforcement that responds effectively to complaints in a timely manner, community that respects the rule of law, and achieve the outcomes articulated in Vision 2030 as follows, and they're noted there, the goals in Vision 2030. And how do we know if this is working, if the needs are being met? Performance indicators are decreased zoning complaints, but not because people have given up complaining. Reduced time to resolve the complaints, improved resident and business satisfaction with zoning, increased resident satisfaction on issues caused by zoning non-conformance. An example of that is on-street parking congestion. So that was the one priority that was the top priority for the council. We feel like that is, seemed like some more discussions. That was what rose to the top. Can we go back to the list? And
if I could make a comment on this one. So at one point, one was written for zoning compliance, that then got split into two for zoning compliance and zoning overhaul. And some of the desired outcomes that were written in for zoning compliance were taken over, or were cut out and copied over to the zoning overhaul. When I read that, I still felt like they were desired outcomes for this priority, and so I put them back in, but I felt bad undoing what someone else had done. So that was part of, I created a separate revision. But moving forward with this one of the desired outcomes, that residents and businesses are confident to invest time and money in Provo. I think that is, for me at least, one of the main reasons why I think we need to cultivate more zoning compliance, because I think that's one of the downsides of not having good zoning compliance is people don't have that security. They're unsure about, do I really want to do the renovation of my house because I don't know what's going to happen next door, and so there are
in addition to zoning, having resident and business satisfaction with zoning, would you like to add that,
not as an indicator, performance indicator, but as a desired outcome.
A desired outcome.
And there were a few more that were taken out when that was split that I think still belong back in there.
You want to read all of those, and we can.
Sure. If we'll roll up to the desired outcomes section. So the one that I just read about feeling confident to invest time and money. Stable areas for family housing where people live for generations.
That's in there. Viable and stable areas. For family housing where people live for generations.
Right.
That was already
more affordable housing for families was one that was moved over, and I think maybe that still is a desired outcome for a zoning overhaul. But I think that will be a constant. I hope that's a consequence of our efforts to increase zoning compliance. Zoning which better reflects the wishes of residents of the market. Well, yeah.
So wishes or just spending the confidence spending money in the Provo.
I guess the way I was looking at this is I would hope that part of our effort to increase zoning compliance would be to have zoning which would allow for some of these other types that maybe there's a market for. And I can see how that also fits under a zoning overhaul, but I would hope that would be part of our effort to increase zoning compliance.
So like wishes, we didn't add your first one, but talked about
Oh.
that people would be more confident in spending money in Provo.
Yes,
That
sorry.
that
Yes,
residents
thank
and
you.
businesses would be more confident. So we haven't added that one.
So residents and businesses are confident to invest time and money in Provo. Removal of financial incentives to ignore zoning regulations. I think that one definitely fits under this priority. ignore zoning regulations, as well as closing of loopholes that allow non-compliance.
Is that one on there? I think
Is
that's
that
already
in there?
there. Just scroll up a little bit. I think that might be already there. Yeah, it's
Oh,
already
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I apologize. Okay, and I think that is, yes, I think that was it.
So,
Mr. Hart, as I review these, I had a question, I just of understanding on the more affordable housing. For outcomes, I need a little more, I'm not sure what that's, how that stands. More affordable housing, does that mean? Okay. Are we going from single family that means we'll stress affordable housing, we need smaller homes, we need apartments, we need, I get some clarification.
What it means to me is that homes that might have been out of the reach, just regular homes in a neighborhood, might have been out of the reach of a regular family because it was being marketed and rented to 5 or 6 singles, and the price of the home had gone up to the price of the rent. And rentals, that's just how you price rentals. But if it was brought back into reality and it was had no more than 3 singles in there, then that would change the value on the market.
I guess the bottom line, the ROI on a single family home is the same that is on that.
Or even the ROI for a rental to 3 individuals is different than the ROI to 6.
Yeah.
so do we need to clarify that in the wording there?
My vision for this is that these are kind of cover sheets, and the first thing that we do when we decide that we want to work on this is that we go in and we start studying those kind of things. So I'm not sure we need to have we need to define what our objective is, but I'm not certain we need to answer all of these questions. I think that's the reason why we'll study it and work on it afterwards.
I also think that for the administration, for other people that will be looking at these sheets, they're going to look at this as a quick reference. And so it might be, if there's just 1 or 2 clarifying words where we put in that more affordable housing for families because homes are not hyperinflated due to rental, or something like that, where they have a clearer picture of what that item actually means.
Yep.
It might be helpful if it's just a word or 2 that might clarify exactly where we're going, because if Mr. Van Buren has that question, then our staff might have that question later, or the administration might have that question. The mayor, hasn't been privy to all the discussions yet, so I think that might be helpful to add a word or 2 of clarification.
It goes away.
Okay, so if we could add that more affordable housing for families, how do I say that? Due to because homes are not hyperinflated due to
Over occupancy.
Home values are not hyperinflated.
That's good.
Are there any other comments on this one in particular?
Do any of the others need additional wordings? And most of them seem pretty clear.
Yeah, I think we should go through, especially like our top 10, and go through and make sure that they say what we want them to say and that they're in the order that we want them to be. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. That's my recommendation. Mr. Sewell?
That sounds good.
So are we
good
with that
with, is everyone good with that? Are there any questions, concerns, edits? Moving forward, Mr. Hyman?
Just, I thought, and this is, there's multiple ways to do this, and the way that makes the most sense to me is not to, we now have a ranking, priority ranking, but instead of just saying, okay, let's take the top 10, my recommendation would be, because of the complexity of how these are all interrelated, and I've brought this up before, but I'd almost like to walk through each one and not read through everything because hopefully we've all read it, but at least have someone speak to it and say, this is, I think this should be a priority, and decide, because there may be some in here that the council majority doesn't feel like it should be a priority.
That could be worked on individually.
And they could be worked on individually. There may be others that may not be as urgent as others. I mean, for me, I think infrastructure maintenance is extremely important and should be a priority. But unless someone helps me see why, it seems like most of these things, a lot of good work has happened in the last couple of years, so we will want to monitor it. But I don't know if there's a whole lot of work to be done right away, and so maybe the urgency isn't as critical.
And you bring up a good point. I don't know, Mr. Parker, if you're looking at this list, and given all of the work that we've done on infrastructure, and that's a priority and was a priority of the council, would you, if it's not in the top 10, would you think that was of lesser importance, or that you're already addressing those needs so it's not as high as some of these other things? What would your perspective be?
Well, I think we look at these as predominantly policy priorities. And so there's two ways to look at that. Either it's unimportant or it's already handled, meaning there's already policy in place, we're marching down the road. And I think we'd see the latter in terms of infrastructure. There might be others on here where we'd say, well, if it's not been a priority to us and it's not been addressed by the council and it's low on your list, then we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it kind of depends on the reason why it ranks low. But I think, again, in terms of infrastructure, I think our sense would be the prior council invested an awful lot of time and energy into that, set us on a good path forward, and we're just marching down the path. And so we really don't need to consider that too much in terms of policy changes.
Right. Although we only approved, so if you take water, for instance, we only approved the first year of the increases for that. And so that will be a healthy discussion as we go.
Continue to come back.
And for me, infrastructure was lower because budgeting priorities encompass that for me. And so that's where we were talking before, where some things overlap a little bit, and budgeting priorities covered that for me. So I did put infrastructure lower, not all the way off, because I wanted to make sure that it's still priority and it's still important, but I felt like something else covered that. So, yeah, Mr.
Does the priority equal urgency? I mean, if the priority to me means it's urgent, I want to get it done, I want to work on it. So I wasn't quite sure what David was saying.
Let's use economic development as an example. Mr. Sewell has really tried to kind of move this one forward. Economic development, I think, is a priority for many of us. As we looked at creating committees and ad hoc committee, Mr. Sewell decided, and there was some discussion, and he made the decision that let's split this into economic development, as far as looking for legislative ways to move the process along, as well as the development approval process. Probably many of us may feel like that overall economic development is a higher priority, but when it came down to it, we chose to create the ad hoc committee for development and approval process because it was a little bit more urgent, with the idea that once that gets settled a little bit more, we come back and do the economic development. So for me, number 6 on our list was chosen beforehand. Chosen beforehand that it would be addressed a little bit later, so that we could put more focus on number 4. Number 14 is neighborhood plans, but hopefully, those things can just continue. So even though it's not high up on our priority, it's being worked on now. And so to me, that's the reason why the priority, the listing of the priorities, I think we have to look at our manpower, we have to look at our resources, and there may be things that we work on actively that are further down the list, and others will need to wait a few months until the resources become available.
Mr. Stewart?
One of the things that we did this for was for budgeting, right? For example, economic development we've added staff, we're spending a considerable amount of money on economic development. And that is justified in my mind as I look at our priorities on priority. Are we spending enough money on zoning compliance? No. in my mind, and it's number one. So I would think when we budget, we would look to adding the staff doing the things that are necessary to make that come to pass. So I look at this, I thought we started it for budgeting purposes. And so in my mind, it does become urgent because we need to know when we do this year's budget, where we want to put the money.
Well, and the administration will be able to see, what the priorities are, and
Right,
they put a
that's
budget
why.
together to bring
That's
to
what
us.
the mayor was asking for.
Yeah,
Tell us what you want,
right,
so we can budget to it.
right.
There are there's a little bit of difference between urgency and priority in the fact that, for example, we're repaving Canyon Road right now. And putting in new sidewalks on Canyon Road. There might be more sidewalks that are more critical to safety for children, and those are in other areas of the city. But we're tearing up Canyon Road. And so now that becomes a priority, even though it may not be the most urgent need as far as safety and some of those other things go. But if we don't do it now, we're going to have to tear up the road again and put in the sidewalk. And so there is a difference between urgency and priority, I think.
So, just as we, a minute ago, kind of recombined something that was kind of split off, I hope we're looking to do that when that's appropriate. For some of these others, the idea of group outreach, to me, is just a part of communicating with the public. And neighborhood plans, we do that as part of the general plan update on a regular basis. It's very related. So some of these could be partly or completely combined with what we have already decided are our top priorities, and saying, we're going to do the general plan update. Do we include anything from the neighborhood plans, or do we just keep it as a separate category? And perhaps some of these others, like oversight, that was so close to our budgeting for outcomes. Do we just want to reabsorb it, or that way maybe we end up with a list that is perhaps shorter than 25?
Right, when those things that are important in oversight could be added to the budgeting priorities if they're not addressed in budgeting priorities right now, we could add some of those oversight. I mean, in my mind, budgeting is oversight.
Yeah.
And so, but if there's something missing, we could put that into this higher priority, right? So, yeah.
So I think this is a really good discussion just to get at what are we looking for, because my understanding was it was different than Mr. Stewart's. I was not looking at this as where do we want to put our money so much as where are we going to put our time and effort. Some of these things could be just a simple, this is a policy that we're going, that we feel that the city should follow, and it could be done with pretty much virtually no money. To address what Mr. Knecht just said, let's take budgeting for a moment. There is a budgeting 2 priorities here. There's also is there a structured
policy?
The structurally sound budget, or did that one not make it onto here?
Oh, the over the 10 years.
Yes.
That one is not.
Okay,
So
so
it was part of the budgeting priority that was included in that.
Okay. And then what was called oversight on here. So let's just take those 3. Is it possible to have a structurally balanced budget without doing budgeting for outcomes? I'd argue that it is possible to do that. Is it possible to have a priority-based budget that is not structurally sound over the 10 years? I think that's possible as well. Oversight, which I would call performance management system. I first read about that in a budgeting for priorities information, pamphlet or introduction, but it made very clear that the performance management system was bigger than the budget, and it's the budget relies on it, but the performance management is bigger than the budget. So so to me, these are we could decide to do one and not some of the others, and so that's why I guess if we're just looking for, hey, what's our top 10, then I guess it makes sense to kind of combine these. If it makes sense of, or if we're looking at it from what are we going to try to accomplish, are we going to, we got some pushback when we said we want a structurally balanced budget. Are we going to move forward with that or not? To me, I like to see them separate, but if that means that 15 of them are going to get ignored because they're not in the top 10, I'd rather combine them. But all things being equal, I don't mind having more of them. Because I hope we can check 7 of these off within a month, and then we can move on to some of the others as well. So I guess it really just depends on how we want to approach this, because I definitely had some different thoughts than others.
Right, and some of these, you bring up a good point too, are going to be accomplished by different groups. Some of these things will be accomplished by the administration. Some will be accomplished by staff that will then bring this to the council, to the full council. Some of this will be accomplished through committees. Some of this will be accomplished through individual council members who feel strongly enough to move forward with something and then bring it to the council, if it requires the full council. But there will be varying groups that will address some of these. And so some may not take a lot of, some may take time, but not a lot of money if it's your own personal council member or whatever you're putting into it. Time is money for most people, and so I think that there is a monetary value attached to almost everything, and especially if you look at our very first one, zoning compliance. We've already been told that if we're going to, be able to do the things that we want to do, it is going to require probably more staff. It's going to require, and maybe even more legal staff to accomplish the goals. So I think most of these will have some, impact, first impact.
Just a final comment there. Sometimes there's a hierarchy and some things are a subset of something else. And so if I can do something on this level and it therefore addresses what's underneath, then let's just step it up and say, gee, if I do oversight, does that mean I will end up with budgeting for priorities? Or if I do budgeting for priorities, can I put in there that one of the things I want to accomplish in order to reach that goal is have that oversight in place? That's what I was meaning by kind of combining them.
Right, and they do go together, because you bring a good point as well with the fact that some of these things in budgeting 2 priorities are within that framework, but there were other things that Park City said we couldn't fit this into the budgeting framework, like HR, some of the HR things. So having that oversight, having that mechanism for oversight for other things. In my mind, the budget is the oversight, right? But budgeting to priorities, maybe we do need another mechanism that looks over some of the HR and some of those things that may not. I can't remember exactly what they said. This doesn't exactly fit into our budgeting priorities. I remember them saying that into the program. They haven't figured out how to get it in there yet. Not that it's not possible, but that they didn't at that time have it in. So maybe those are things that can go hand in hand. Then one doesn't just automatically take over the other. So are there other comments? Okay, and about zoning compliance, do we feel comfortable with that one? See if we could move on to the next one. With development approval process, was there anything that anyone felt needed to be added to this or edited that isn't in the current wording? So this was to appropriately plan for the anticipated growth in Provo, especially for West Provo development. And then if you can skip down to the outcomes.
That was a different one.
Oh, okay. What were we looking at? Wasn't development, it was West Side development that we were looking at? Oh, okay, that's why. It's so confused with the West Side part. Okay, so development approval process is the process that this committee, that Mr. Sewell has put together, would look at. And the desired outcomes would be a process which quickly approves high quality proposals that align with the city's vision and quickly denies other proposals and is robust enough to differentiate between both types. The process which encourages citizen involvement, a process which is predictable for developers, residents, and staff, a process which only asks of developers what is pertinent to evaluate the proposal, and a council process, a pre-council process, which the council has faith in. Are there other desired outcomes that we would add, or are there outcomes there that we feel should be adjusted?
I think as we look at the development process, we're listing desired outcomes. I'm not sure what the source of those are. I would think that we would want to go to private market and say, what's the problem you're feeling? And maybe that's how these were addressed. I don't know. And say, okay, we don't need to jump in and take this development process and just revamp it unless we're accomplishing solving a problem. And if we identify the problem enough to know what our desired outcomes would be. Does that make any sense at all? That's my only, is that first bullet point of a process which quickly approves high quality proposals that sometimes I'm not so sure you can do that. The speed and quality and how to, it sounds good, but I'm not sure.
I think that's a good point, Kay, because as I talk with community development, they're not really seeing a lot of problems. I mean, we got a process in place, and there are a few things that more or less need tweaking, and they're not saying we want it done like some cities that I've heard in 2 weeks. I'm not sure that I agree with you on that. I think we've got to look at the process and see.
Why don't we, I don't know, as I say, put this on hold until we have a report back from the committee. You're going to have a committee look at this. I mean, I've heard some of these things at council lunches where people say, I spent $100,000 and maybe it should only cost me $20,000. Wayne, you talked about that. You want to elaborate on that?
Well, I think first of all, not all development applications are the same. Some are relatively easy because they're already in a platted subdivision. It's just a question of resolving a drainage issue or something like that. When we talk in bigger challenges like a rezone or a change to the general plan and an associated rezone, those get a lot more difficult to manage. And historically, what we've tried to do as a city is strike the balance between what a developer needs to know to make an application. In other words, how far does he have to go to get a good pro forma, basically. It says, okay, I can afford to develop this and make the right amount of money that's worth my time and energy. On the flip side, there is the council's desire from a legislative perspective to know exactly what they're getting when they do a rezone. And again, that can actually take two forms. One can be kind of what we've done, which is do a full-blown project application plan, which includes all the utilities, and all the specifics, all the engineering details associated with that. Or you can load up the language in the zoning ordinance so that nothing will happen in that zone that you don't like. Does that make sense? So you can do it project by project, or you can do it zone by zone. But and so what we've done historically is front-end load the process, so the council gets an unquestioned ability to say, what are we getting with this project? Something in between, which we've talked about before, has been this idea of what we call the concept plan, which doesn't get into the level of detail that would be required for a development approval by the city. In other words, we know exactly the elevation of the sewer laterals and all of those kinds of things have to be done before the council even begins to take a look. Or could we do enough that says this is the general site plan, could slightly be varied if necessary during the development approval process to make room for utilities or other things. Here's an elevation, typical elevations, and maybe not even for this project, but here's 5 that represent the kind of development we're talking about. And so if you could do a project concept plan for something in the $20,000 to $25,000 range, the developer has a lot less risk if the process isn't quite as predictable as he would wish. And so again, I think the result of that is you identify problems earlier. You have a good quality discussion, but you reduce the risk of having something that you don't want by some factor. It's not a zero risk, but is there an acceptable level of risk? And so again, I think that's part of what Councilman Rasul is hoping to do with this ad hoc group that we were meeting actually tomorrow to kind of scope out, is to talk about where is that balance between zero risk and 100% risk, and where are the elected officials comfortable, and that will help define then what a planned submission looks like for a rezone. So we may not have to get entirely into all the details in order to have a comfort level on the part of elected officials that we're adopting. What you see is what you get.
Mr. Harder.
So there's actually some symmetry between that and what I think process should be for this is this sheet should be fairly high level document, and then this, once we say, okay, this is going to be our priority, then this is what causes us to create the committee. Now we did a little bit different just because as the timing of this played out, but the idea is, we say this is a priority, and then we say, okay, how are we going to address it? Well, we're going to form a committee. Now that committee is going to go out and talk with people in the private industry and take their input, and so maybe this evolves as we gather that information. But I think it would be foolish for us to try to predict everything that's going to come out through that study and put it in here. This is just to get the ball rolling. This is just like, why did we create that committee? Well, we have some questions and we want to see if it can be done better, and we want to reach out to all the stakeholders. So that's what's in these sheets, not the final answers, because we don't know what those final answers are. But this is just, it says, this is something we're concerned about, this is something we're going to be working on, and then let's go out and study and research it.
Well, mostly I was just going to echo that. And really, the purpose of the committee is to come up with this list.
Right.
So this is kind of a good first high-level review of the kinds of things we might come up with. But
And I want to reiterate my support for the staff and the great job that they do also. I think, we talk about a committee, but we're going to put our staff to work on some of these things, and I appreciate the hard work. They're going to be really great information sources to us.
I just want to mention too, as we talked at the retreat, there's actually a block that falls in between outcomes and measures, and that is sort of the to-do list. It's the process, and that can be developed in a variety of ways. It could be developed by an ad hoc committee. It could be developed by a staff review. It could be developed by a few council members and a few administration people sitting down and brainstorming through that. I mean, there's a variety of ways we could figure out that middle block. But I think what we're talking about is that missing block. And at some point, we have to come back and make a recommendation to you about what gets inserted between outcomes and measures. And that's really about process and work product. And so we've got, again, some work to still do in between the two branches to try to figure out exactly what that ought to look like. But I think there does come a point where we come back with a set of specific recommendations, and those actually get plugged into your outcome statements.
Would you do that for the highest priority ones first?
Probably, or where there's sufficient interest to jump on it first. Some of those may be priorities. Some may be the ability to have the time to focus or the energy to focus. If there's one or two council members that feel pretty strongly about that, the rest of the body agrees. I mean, it could be an issue between your council staff and the administration coming up with a draft that we would bring back to you, or you may have enough personal interest that you want to get a little more deeply involved. And again, we're certainly open to whatever process that is that gets a block that we could agree on in terms of the work product and the to-do list.
So, as far as this one is concerned, is that your recommendations to send this to the committee after the committee work out their expected outcomes?
My recommendation would be that we accept this as a council priority, and like I said, the committee would actually, would fall under this priority, or that the reason that we have a committee would be justified by this priority. Now, we formed that committee before we officially call this a priority, but we already knew this was a priority. So, but yeah, my recommendation would be agree that it is a priority, and then that informs that committee. And then the committee informs the priority. As another example, time of use electricity, somehow this ended up, in the top 2/3. I mean, it's down there, but not as low as I expected it to be. That might be a single conversation, and then we say, is this possible, or is this not possible? And if it's not possible, then in a week it disappears because we've investigated it. Maybe it's possible, and it takes a few more conversations, and then it becomes the policy that in 2 years we would hope that we have this system in place. I'm surprised it's even as high as it is, but
that's because I've understood before.
Okay, well, I'm glad you like it. I think it's a good idea. But
I need to tell you why when you're done.
The amount of staff time and the amount of resources that need to go into to running that down. But I would still like to see that it's a council priority. We're going to look into it. Yeah. And I don't think it would be high urgency, but I would like to see it there so that somewhere, in the lazy days of summer and in late August, someone can say, oh, well, we haven't done anything about that. Let's have that conversation now. So
hopefully you'll see in the next few weeks.
Okay, I'm glad.
See, being on the energy board, that goes to how we're going to price solar. And that's a huge issue right now. So we're going to see that right away. So I rated it high, even though I knew it was coming to the council, because the energy department is working on it for some period of time.
I will
So all the work that you talked about is been done. They're just in the final stages.
Wonderful. Excellent.
Welcome here, Chris. So then on to the next one, general plan update. Can we pull that one up? This one was very abbreviated. Is this the one I'm thinking of? The general plan update is a very abbreviated template. Yeah. So it's the general plan is supposed to be updated every 5 years, and the update is overdue. And our desired outcomes are plan for Provo to accommodate population growth. I think it's a priority because we know it needs to be done. And but yet the desired outcomes, and this has not been fleshed out at all. So
I hit this about 2 a.m. and I was about done, and I guess I forgot that it wasn't fleshed out. But and any of us, all of us, should be able to help flesh that out. But yeah, there's no question that one was as a stub that still needs to be filled out.
right, that's important, but
not reflecting what was written.
right.
Can I put a desired outcome on there?
Yeah.
I'd like to see that one of the desired outcomes would be a better coordination and understanding of interaction between the general plan and Vision 2030.
You want to? Let's just put those up there, and then we can talk about these.
The desired outcome of the general plan would be to have a better understanding of the interaction between the general plan and Vision 2030. Something like that.
Another outcome for the general plan would be to we have the transportation plan, we have the bicycle plan that's been recently adopted. I don't know if some of the other plans, neighborhood plans that have been codified. There's a Parks and Rec plan, and I'm assuming that all of those go into the general plan planning and update. But incorporating all of the codified plans that would help. And I know that the general plan is supposed to be general. It's not supposed to be specific, but I think those help us. They help relate to what we're trying to go.
Well, I think generally speaking, the relationship between a lot of these infrastructure plans and the general plan tend to be at a pretty high level. So they're kind of value and outcome levels. So they may not specifically get into we're going to replace the sewer line in years 5 or 6, but it will get into the level of saying we need to provide additional sewer capacity for X or Y. Or from a parks perspective, the Parks Master Plan, for example, has as a value statement that we ought to have a neighborhood park within a half mile of every doorstep in Provo. That's kind of, so that might be included in the general plan. And then illustrating where the deficiencies are. So it would be at that sort of level. So rather than just incorporating the plan, it's probably a couple, 3 pages. It would be excerpted from the plan, it would be rolled into the general plan. And then it could be incorporated by reference, or it could just be a reference to, say, our current Parks and Recreation Master Plan suggests the following. So it's not incorporated in total, but tries to incorporate it at a high level.
Could you describe the process for a general plan update? How does that generally happen? Are all the departments asked to give their input, and community development is the one that kind of
Yes.
drives that? And
That's part of it.
What is the process?
That's part of it. If there's a very intensive neighborhood process, typically, we'll invite neighborhood committees to come in and take a look at their component of the plan and weigh in. Otherwise, there's also a broad community involvement process, so there will be a number of community meetings or town hall meetings or online opportunities to weigh in. And again, all of those things are assimilated by the staff, included in the draft or multiple drafts for the general plan. The Planning Commission will then consider all of those and recommend what stays in the plan or doesn't stay in the plan, and that's subsequently adopted by Planning Commission and referred to the council. So that's normally the process. Now again, this year, given the number of neighborhood plans that we've adopted recently, again, those where we've done a recent adoption, it may just be a gut check with the neighborhood because they've already invested a lot of time and energy into that before it's just assimilated into the general plan. But that other areas where we've not spent a lot of neighborhood planning time, we'll have a larger voice in that process as we go forward. And then again, the city departments will look at it. We'll also involve outside entities, so involve the school district and the chamber and some others, and offer them an opportunity to weigh in and comment. And then the robust public process and planning commission will kind of be the final arbiter before a recommendation gets made to the council.
Has that process begun? Where are we at?
Yeah, we're in
right
process. We ought to have when community development's here a little bit later. Let's get an update on where they're at. I think in some ways they've been wanting to do the Vision 2030 update. I mean, they're running parallel, but I think they want to get the bulk of the Vision 2030 process done because that has a significant influence in the broader picture of the general plan. So I think their perspective is Vision 2030 is kind of part of the general plan update. It's a precursor.
This one, the west side plan seemed like kind of a natural fold into this one to me.
So what's not clear to me, and I like things that are predictable. We really want that for the developers, investors, neighborhood, the council, everybody. So when a project is reviewed by staff, and staff makes a report to the planning commission, they say this is how it complies with the general plan. And if I was just an average person or a developer and someone said, here's the general plan, it might be a little unclear which parts of the general plan are going to be part of that review, including which chapters or like in chapter 13, the implementation measures. And I wrote this number down, I might be wrong, 13614. It's one that stood out for me. It says something like when multifamily housing is built on the outskirts or edge of residential development, the traffic will use a collector or an arterial and not be funneled through the neighborhood. I think that applies with the Carver Seed property, for example. And yet I didn't see that quoted, referenced by anybody in any discussions. And so if there are certain things, it'd just be nice if there was a checklist. If you're a developer, make sure you look closely at this, this, and this in the general plan and or Vision 2030 because we can talk about complete streets. And these are the things we're going to be looking at and you need to consider.
It's a great observation.
With regard to what Dave just mentioned, I can agree with it. It's in the general plan, but I think we need to, when we get to the south, the west side development, I think that's going to be a little bit more unique. It's got some unique challenges and opportunities, urgencies, and that I think we need to look at and decide where we want to put that on the priority. Because it may be the same, but I can see it being a little different also. So,
did you want your comment to be added as a desired outcome, or you?
Yeah, actually, we need to have some clarity.
That's
So, you know, if there's a checklist of certain parts of the general plan, certain implementation measures that will be looked at carefully and must be complied with, then everyone needs to know what those are. And if there's some that aren't, why not? You know, maybe they need to be reviewed and removed if there's some that are not on the list for whatever reason. But I'd like to see a list. And not just, you might add Vision 2030 too, because we have two documents and they're complementary, they address different things. I think you might find some complete street language in the general plan, but it's certainly right at the top of Vision 2030.
Does that say what you, does that encompass what you think?
Start choosing the name of that.
Yeah.
35.
Mr. Hardy?
I've got two, if I really quick, just to address that a little bit. Now, if I recall correctly, November-ish, I was sitting in here for one of these work sessions before I was on the council, and I asked the question, or said, are we looking at making Vision 2030 Chapter 1 of the general plan, because the Chapter 1 of the general plan is kind of this neighborhood or citywide vision, and I thought really quickly people said, "Oh, we're already doing that." Did I misunderstand that? I thought at one point it was the plan was to take Vision 2030 and make it Chapter 1.
I think there's concern about, and most of the administration, correct me if I'm wrong here, but about codifying the Vision 2030, because that process was different than. So if it's codified, then the council can edit and, you know, fix and whatever, right? If it's codified, but if it's this was a different process because it involved citizens and committees and people that work outside of the city, like education and healthcare, and they felt like it was a broader process than what like the general plan would be, where it's actually codified. It's something that we as a council, you know, would make law or not, right? And so. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was kind of the feeling with Vision 2030.
And I don't think, personally, I haven't given any thought whether it's in or not. I don't know if the community development has. I think that's a good general guideline, is to remember that Vision 2030 is broader than just the city. We have components of it that are our responsibility, but many components of Vision 2030 we have nothing to do with, other than potentially being an advocate for. And so again, I think if you wanted to do that, we'd probably look at the things that were specific to the general plan and try to incorporate them in some fashion.
Okay, so it sounds like this is a bigger discussion that probably should be taken during the priority section, but I have some pretty strong feelings on that. Would love to continue this at another time.
We are going to be addressing some of these things in the policy governance committee.
Great. I'd love to be part of that.
You are part of that, by the way.
Okay. My main comment was the West Side Plan. I see this as more analogous to the neighborhood plan, so similar to the southeast neighborhood, southeast general plan, southeast master plan, and these neighborhood plans fill a different role than the general plan. And so I guess it would just be my concern if we're talking about rolling the West Side Plan into the general plan rewrite. I mean, we're talking about different levels to hear. So
maybe more part of the neighborhood plan is what you're thinking, the neighborhood planning process.
yes, I think it would be part of the neighborhood planning process. I just think it needs to have maybe being the highest priority as far as neighborhood plans go.
Have one little asterisk to that. I think Dave's right, with this exception. There are some really large policy decisions on the west side that I think should be made before you go to the neighborhood plan.
Okay.
Agricultural designation and some things like that the council's hinted at and talked about but never really resolved. So right now, I think if you went straight to the neighborhood plan something that may not be in harmony with what the council would like to see from a visionary perspective out there. So I think it's almost a middle step, if that makes sense. But when the administration has said before, we're looking for some guidance on the west side. That's what I'm personally looking for, is some of that policy that then the neighborhood plan is ready to implementation. I think it's kind of in between.
I agree, and I also remind, I don't see on here the recommendation from the People's Army to look at the west side with green space. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, so hopefully we can make sure that we follow through with People's Army recommendations when we do.
If you go to the neighborhood plan before you do that, neighborhood plan.
Exactly. Right. So your point is well taken. We need to do the west side plan on the top level on some of these things before we do the neighborhood plan.
Bring the mayor up on a conversation we had 2 weeks ago in this meeting. There were some concerns among residents and council members. There was a feeling that, particularly I think with the Southeast master plan, that there was a committee. The committee was thanked and dismissed, and then the plan evolved before it went to the planning commission. And so there was this concern, like, wait, why? And community development made it clear that this is their plan, and they create it in consultation with the neighbors. One of my concerns, I guess, is I think gets right in line with what you just talked about. There was even a suggestion at the end of last year that, well, we don't really need to update the general plan because we're just doing all 34 neighborhoods and then we'll be done. But so the concern is, is it wise to do we need some citywide strategy, or is it okay that 34 sections in the neighborhood creates the city plan? And so at least what I heard 2 weeks ago was that community development is consulting with the neighbors, but it is, and he said it pretty clearly, this is community development's plan, and we consider Vision 2030, and we consider the general plan, and so we take the input, but then this is our plan, and so it's not the neighbors writing it. But the concern that I have, and I think others still have, is that maybe that's not understood by everyone that's participating, and there may be these expectations that this is not the city's plan for my neighborhood, this is my plan for my neighborhood, kind of thing. So anyway, I think that's something that needs to be addressed. But I agree. We need some citywide planning, citywide vision, in addition to, or to help inform these more specific ones.
I can foresee in the future looking at the general plan, looking at the neighborhood plan, and having the council think, well, this is what the neighborhood wants, and it goes with the general plan, and so, and kind of make that sort of natural progression with thinking that that's okay, where the neighborhood plan was in consultation with a few neighbors that were willing to be part of that committee, right? And so calling it a neighborhood plan makes it seem like, well, this is what the neighborhood wants. And so I think there's a little bit of a disconnect about what it really is, and maybe
we could call it community development neighborhood planning consultation with the neighbors.
If I were to define what community development said, I would say it's the city's plan.
Okay.
So
certainly we want ample neighborhood input into that. But an average neighbor is not going to know things like monetary constraints, and they're not going to know some of the infrastructure constraints, and so things like that. And that's why it's a balance of their input. It's professional staff, policymakers, all coming together to make that done. If you think about the process we require anyone to go through to amend the general plan, they have to provide a change to the text that they want to see. We go through a lengthy process of public input. It is submitted to the planning commission, who accepts, rejects, or modifies. It's submitted to the council, who accepts, rejects, or modifies. And so the neighborhood plan process is really, I mean, in some ways, it is an amendment to the general plan. Right? I mean, we're asking general plan type questions through the process, and never does an applicant come in and say, well, this is my plan, you need to adopt it because it's what I want to do with this piece of property. We go through a robust vetting process to ensure that it meets the city's overall objectives and aligns as closely as possible with the developer's or the applicant's objectives. But at the end of the day, if it conflicts, then the council will make a decision. So I think if we think about neighborhood plans in that light, to kind of see how this all works. There's certainly an applicant, which is community development on behalf of a neighborhood. But at the end of the day, that process has to be fully vetted. It will never just be dropped on the planning commission and the council and adopted. It has to go through a more robust process than that, just as in the general plan.
So as a desired outcome, we don't really have like our resident satisfaction or development community satisfaction or city satisfaction with the plan, the direction that the plan would take us. Do we want anything? Is that a desired outcome?
Or is that a performance indicator?
Maybe that's a performance indicator too. We don't have any performance indicators either. So is that an indicator that we want? Is maybe the satisfaction. I don't know that anyone's going to be satisfied. Maybe if nobody's satisfied, it's probably a good plan. So maybe that's a better way to put it. But do we want some sort of indicator there that this is kind of getting us where we want to go? As a city, our residents have feel like this is a good plan. Does our development community feel like this makes sense? I don't know. What are our indicators?
Certainly, on most of the things we're doing, a performance indicator would be public satisfaction with whatever priority it is, including this one. And when Dave was mentioning how the committee felt in Southeast Provo, if they were rating us or the general plan, they probably would get a great rating. But that was partly due to the expectations going into the process. And so we need to make sure that those expectations are realistic and they understand what their input is needed for and the likely outcomes, that there already is a plan. I mean, frankly, in the general plan right now, there's, I believe, a plan for every neighborhood or every part of town. And I'm not sure that we even reviewed the existing plan when we sat down as a committee. It was more like, go take some pictures and let's talk about your neighborhood. And it's always nice to review where you are before you move to a different place. So public satisfaction, yeah, that's a high thing. You want people to buy into it. You want developers and people on the outside to go, hey, that's a great plan. So that whether you're inside or outside of the city, you say, well, yeah, we've got a good plan and we're behind it.
So comfortable with the city, comfortable with the development community, or buy-in from. So we have public satisfaction, buy-in from the public.
Appropriate housing. That means adequate housing for our communities. We apply for the general plan. Business growth. We're providing the services that our community wants. All that's part of the general plan in my mind. So if we're getting those things, this is working.
So it's maybe achieving the goals that we've set in our vision statement and in our other codified plans.
Will you say that second one again so it can be written?
Sir, um, supplying adequate services to the community, business growth.
Business growth.
Go.
And I came in late, I missed 2 weeks ago, so if this is covered, excuse me, but I think community development is also kind of asked the question of the council. I don't know if you determined is the general plan that has been used in the past is a document that, for lack of a better term, controls development because it's certain things are not mentioned in there versus a document that states what you hope comes there. I'm curious to know if the council spent any time on that. The recent resolution amongst yourself as to what you hope from the document. Slightly change the nature of it being, for instance, an area in the general plan may be all agricultural designated, even though everybody knows it's not going to be agricultural, but if you change that in the general plan, you'll to come into that. If you don't change it, then nobody really knows, you lose that predictability, nobody really knows what you want to have happen.
So maybe one of the desired outcomes would be to decide as a council, is this a guiding document? Is it the safeguard, or is it a safeguard that an opportunity to control, as the mayor said, control development?
Or is it a clear look at what you is? If it says agricultural, you really intend that for everyone
For it to be agricultural, rather than just having a placeholder. Yeah.
So we're really focused on things like budgeting for outcomes. It's so important. But when I look at the general plan, we have property in the city, some of which generates no real revenue, but requires services. And I think we have to keep in mind that when we do land use planning, we have to plan with our budget in mind. Ironton is probably everything in Ironton is going to generate money. It's business property that's being taxed at a higher level. It's providing jobs. Perhaps some of those things. Perhaps we'll do some retail. I don't know. So Ironton is cash positive, and other parts of town are cash negative. And I'm just concerned that as we grow, we do it in a balanced manner, and we say, where are we going to have the cash positive things on our map to balance the cash negative things so our quality of life doesn't suffer as we pay for everything as we go forward. And so just need to
Plan with the budget in mind.
Plan with the budget in mind. If we bring in a subdivision and we know it's going to cost us money, where's that extra money coming from when we are hopefully renovating them all or doing something that's going to generate extra money?
Just to quickly answer the mayor, we can get back to this, but you asked about if we looked at that. One of the priority sheets that was submitted is clear vision, which instead of looking at it specifically for the general plan, but how do we structure our vision? How do we communicate that vision? And what's the relationship between these different documents? Just so, just to kind of take a holistic look at what is our vision and how do we structure it? How do we communicate it?
So are we going to go on to the next one? So,
just a quick point. I can't distinguish between those first two. The ability of both those. Or what's the difference, I guess?
Buy-in from the public or public satisfaction?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we could take out the buy-in maybe.
Or move it up and say desired outcome. To me, indicators need to be measurable. And that might be a little bit more difficult to quantify.
Yeah. So this one, move as an outcome.
Sure. All right. So, any other comments on
thing you could measure is the level of citizen engagement in the general plan process. So you could measure how many online comments are received. That's a good measurable if you're looking for a broad base of public involvement.
Indicator.
And indicators.
More public input, the more successful the process should be.
Public input or public involvement.
You want level of?
Yeah. So it's the level of public involvement in the process. Thank you. So the next one, the economic development. And probably need to keep our comments just to what edits we would make to this so that we can move through these a little quicker. But economic development. The goal was thriving economy, the desired outcomes, our stable jobs, suitable retail where residents want to shop in order to retain our own sales tax dollars, broad retail offerings, rejuvenated mall. There are other outcomes with the economic development.
I'd like to say something about downtown, making sure that we have a great, I don't know what it is exactly, a great activity downtown, great, a lot of viable downtown.
Vibrancy. That's kind of the way we've tried to measure what happens downtown. So that's,
thank you. That's a good one.
Low vacancy rate, high number of pedestrians, business lifespan.
And then the performance indicators would be ability to buy a soccer ball in the city limits. That was what came out of our retreat. I think that says a lot. We could also say pet food. I don't know. There are lots of things we could insert there. But you get the idea, right? So more foot traffic, vibrancy in retail, commercial areas, increased tax revenues from commercial property tax, sales tax, occupancy of retail space, resident satisfaction survey, and redevelopment leakage study. What do we mean by redevelopment leakage study? What does that mean?
Well, it's typically a retail leakage study, and what it does is say if you were entirely self-sufficient, how many dollars would be spent in your community on various topics, and what are you exporting because you don't have a retail offerings locally. So we typically call that a retail leakage study.
Let's change that to retail. That makes a lot more sense. And we did have that retail strategies.
Yeah. So we've had one
survey
done,
as a
and we could
baseline.
compare. We could,
Yeah.
after some period of time, we can do another one. Let's see if we've improved or not.
Are there any other things you want to add to that, Mr. Russell?
I just wanted to give a shout out to the Economic Development Department. They actually put together a really good mission statement for this. I don't have it with me, and we're still kind of tweaking it just a little bit, but so I don't really think we need to go there right now. But I was impressed with the sort of the depth and breadth of how they approached this topic.
So we seem to skip over that, what's in blue about Vision 2030. Did we read through that? Are we good with that? I don't know what all the goals are that are referenced there by number.
Right. Well, we did that because the document started to get really long and cumbersome to try to read through. And
Sure.
so I actually asked that we abbreviate it just by the goal because just trying to get through all the documents and then prioritize them was becoming more difficult. So that's why those are abbreviated. But yeah, those are all the 2030 goals that would relate to these outcomes that we're looking for.
So some of those, because I haven't in this context.
Yeah, and if we want, we can just take those out. If it's easier just to take those out because they're not really necessary. They just speak to the community goals as well as what are that go along with this priority that we're making. That there's a lot of community support, or at least with the Vision 2030, those that were involved with that. So there was a lot that supported this on the same priority. So we can remove those if you're more comfortable with that. It's a priority. I don't think it's necessary for you.
Well, leaving it in at least gives you a reference where to go.
Yeah.
So
you could say possible 2030 goals, but relate to that. So is there anything else we would want to add or edit to this one? Okay, let's move on to the next one is budgeting priorities. Budgeting 2 priorities. Now, this is one that we took to the budget committee and asked for feedback there, and then we put it up for the council members to add or to edit. This is what we've come up with. So our intent statements, our budget intent statements, are included in that. If we can go to the desired outcomes. The desired outcome would be to have a budget where, and I should turn the time over to Larry, he can probably explain this a lot better than me in the financial speakies. But really to have a budget where we can see very clearly how programs are organized, their intended function, how the program furthers our city goals, the actual FTEs of personnel dedicated to the programs in the past, the current FTEs, and the proposed FTEs for the next budget cycle. Apparently right now we have the allowed FTEs, but they're not, we don't really have exact numbers of who's of those FTEs to an actual person. Does that make sense? And so having that clearly stated, the history of expenditures and the proposed budget for the program, for each program, the historical and projected revenues the program will generate, historical and projected funding sources for the program, information documenting the achievement of program goals and contributions to the city goals, how our budget is tied to those, and assessment by the administration of the relative importance of the program in achieving the city goals. And then if we go to the indicators, the budget updates and our interim reports would include actual FTEs, expenditures, and updated information on contributions to city goals. A more transparent way of being able to see how the money is allocated, how the programs are set up, and how the budget ties into our expected outcomes or our desired outcomes. Is there anything to add to that, Larry? We were in discussions with George or Gary.
No, these are some pretty good requests, and I'm not sure everything that's involved in these requests. I think they're good. I think it's important to know them. This is something that's kind of above me at this point. What am I asking at this point?
Mr. Harden?
You had asked a question. I didn't know if you were going to get into.
Oh.
But anyways. Okay. I'm curious, and I don't want to do exactly what I've been hoping to wouldn't do, which is get down too deep into the details. But just in looking at this, I'm curious, concerned, just want to know more about timing of this. I do think that Provo City should have some sort of priority-based budgeting of one program or another. I think it's been shown to be best practice. I think we should be doing that. It's the timing is what I'm concerned about. I think if we were to say that, I think it's unreasonable to say, well, by next, March, April, whenever that we're going to get the first proposal of the budget. I think it'd be not possible to have a priority-based budget at that time. I'm not even sure, in 12 more months. But I do think we need to get there sooner than later. And I think anywhere that there's things like Provo 360, is that the name of the new? So if Provo 360 is being implemented now over the next 18 months, we need to make sure that the way that it's implemented, it has all of the aspects that we want it to, so that when we do move completely over to some sort of budget-based, priority-based budget, that the system will be compatible with it. We won't get to the end and try to implement this and realize, oh, well, if only we had purchased and implemented these aspects of that software platform, we'd be, so I think some of it needs to be done ASAP, and I think there's other parts that we may want to wait until Pro 360 is in place before we have a fully operational priority-based budget.
Right, and I think what we're asking is of the administration, this is how we would like to receive the budget updates, the interim reports. This is the information that we would like to glean from those reports, and it seems like now is the right time for implementing something that would produce those kinds of reports. And because we have the ERP system or the Provo 360, if we waited till that was already implemented, I'm sure it would cost a lot of money to then go back in and try to design it to be able to give us these kinds of reports. So what we're saying here is, this is the information that we feel like we need to be able to make good decisions when it comes to the budget. And however you are able to produce those reports would be great. But it seems like now is the time to start that process because of the system and getting that in place. And so that's really what this is asking for, is this is the information that we need, that we feel like we need to be able to make good decisions regarding the budget, and hopefully that can be integrated into the system as they go. Did you have something to say?
Just one question. This appears to me to be a budget that's focused on programs. Programs and priorities are not always analogous. Let me give you a good example. We talked about a very high priority being zoning enforcement. Well, if your outcome is well-ordered, safe neighborhoods in which to live, zoning enforcement is a program. That's true, but parking enforcement plays into that equation. Community policing plays into that equation. And so how does budgeting by program align specifically with your priorities, which may cross multiple programs? And so again, I guess I'm hoping before we get to the point where we start laying out the accounting basis by which we're going to set up the new financial and budgeting package, we can sort of define, because budgeting for priorities could include evaluating and looking at multiple programs and sub-segments of multiple programs, I guess is. So again, this is all about program budgeting. That's fine. That's one way of looking at it, but it may not get you to priority-based budgeting.
Well, it's easier to find, in my mind, it's easier to understand how our priorities fit in when we understand what the department's priorities are. This is how they prioritize their programs. This is how the city prioritizes programs. And then when we can kind of look at what our priorities are and see how do they work within this framework of the city or the departments, and then I think when it comes to making tougher decisions, you understand, oh, this is high priority for this department, this is high priority for the city. It makes our decision making easier when we can see how things are prioritized by department or for the city in general. And so I find it really valuable to be able to compare. And then if someone comes with a request, and you can look at the council's priorities and the administration's priorities, and you can see this priority, you can almost tell them if it's going to be a priority or not, if it's something that's going to work or not, right? And you don't waste a lot of time discussing things that may not come to a level of priority for the council. And that's not the only example, but that's like an example of how it could be helpful to have those targets. Mr. Connect.
Okay, then the mayor. So when it talks about programs, so if we do it by program, we need to decide how many programs we're doing. And I'm sure you can divide it down into so many that would be unwieldy, but we need to have a list. We need to figure out what programs we want to go through this process. And at the very top, you can't quite read it because that bar is in the way. It says a description of how the program furthers city goals. Sure. And then at the very bottom, an assessment by the administration of the relative importance of the program in achieving city goals. So you're right, the COP program and the parking enforcement and zoning enforcement are all tied together. But if we evaluated all those programs, it would say in each evaluation that this furthers one or two of the goals by doing this. And at the bottom, the relative importance is big or small. Yeah, again, and I suppose we find some things that are relatively unimportant. We may have to rethink why are we doing them. But I like what's up there, but it's just not clear how many programs we would be doing this to, because that ups the level of expense and time to produce the report.
A lot of cases, and I think, I'm just trying to think through the logistics of this. So I have a youth sports program, and we'll be using the same people to do baseball and soccer and hockey and same administrators and program managers and marketing budget, those kinds of things. Is it critical to know, and if youth hockey is a program, and you say, well, fine, we're just not going to do youth hockey anymore because we have a higher priority. Well, there's a cost associated with that, but the cost may not be discrete. In other words, I may not save as much money as you think by eliminating that program. And so I guess this, getting to Councilmember Connect's comments, a lot of it depends on how low level you want to get versus mid-level versus high level. And again, that's kind of one of the challenges I encountered in my career in program budgeting, is that programs are not neat little packages that you can just eliminate one of and it saves you that much money. You can identify the cost of the program, but if you eliminate it or upgrade it, the costs are not specifically directly related. And so again, I think it's good to know the cost of programs, compare those over time, compare them to outcomes. But again, if we're trying to prioritize budgets, it's not always as neat and clean as it would seem.
Mr. Stewart? Well, the number one priority is pretty clear, I think, for the council, and it's going to involve programs in different departments.
Yes.
But that's okay, in my mind, because you can accumulate those programs together and see what your total cost is. Because it still is budgeting to the priority by department. Is that okay?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from there. I guess again, it's the ability to slice and dice the programs the way you want and have the outcome there the way you want it to be. I can say community-oriented policing, but that's not really all about zoning enforcement. Parking is all about neighborhoods. Some of it's about downtown, some of it's about handicap parking. And so again, the more you slice and dice, the harder it is to make good prioritizing decisions. So it can be a good general framework, but again, I'm just trying to caution you that the more detailed you get, the harder this becomes when you make those kind of decisions.
I think part of the reason that the wording was left as open-ended and as at such a high level is to allow the administration the opportunity to respond and say, this is how we think the program should be conceptualized, and this is how we would try to respond to the council's desires. And that would continue the conversation then between the council and the administration on, does the council feel that that's responsive? If not, where would they like some additional clarification? So we're trying with this document to say, this is the kind of information the council would like to have. Now, administration, can you come back and tell us how much time do you need, how much additional resources, if any, how would you respond, so that because this is clearly going to be a conversation over some period of time.
Let me just, I got this whole bunch of random thoughts, if I can try to share them with you. One is a concern that a good way to kill anything is to make it too bureaucratic.
So let's suppose that a new council comes in and they say, hey, zoning enforcement is a priority to us. And we say to you in response, well, in the next year's budget cycle, you have to do this, this, and this, and this to get that considered. Well, by then, years have gone by and everything's very different by then. And so one of my little cautions, along with Wayne's cautions, is give us some flexibility and ability to be nimble in this. And don't over restrict how a program gets introduced into the city. Also, we may know very quickly that we want something eliminated, and we have to go through a very extensive bureaucratic process to eliminate it. Trade, that's one of the examples. That would be unfortunate as well. The other thing is, if I understood the Park City model, and I think, assuming that's what most of us have in our head right now, because that's what was presented to us most recently, this is not about the current council's priorities. This is about 3 or 4 Vision 2035 type priorities, not the priorities of a given council that they're budgeting for. And it sounds to me a little bit like the urge is to budget for the current priorities of the current council. And the problem with that is the budget is so slow in changing that it can respond to these 3 or 4 major things up here, but it doesn't respond very well to a new council's current priorities. And if I understood the Park City model, they were budgeting for these 3 or 4 outcomes, not for these outcomes as they come along. And then I think my last comment is, I find these very confusing. I don't know really what you're asking for. Ultimately, what is it that you want? Is it more data? Is it more clarity? Does that make sense? And this is quite micro to me.
So the indicator, we want budget updates, interim reports, and I think let's say a final budget with actual FTEs, expenditures, and updated information on contributions to city goals. And I don't think that the idea was that this was going to be this year's, priorities. I think this is going to be a 1.5 to 2 year process, like it was for Park City to actually initiate. But the timing is now, because if we're going to get it into the system and get it into a position where we can actually get the reports that we want, that we can't currently get, and get the reporting that we want to get, it's going to have to be written into the software. And so that's mostly why it's #1 priority for me.
So let me tell you one of the things that I think I identified from the Park City presentation is first the clarification that that's the model that you want. We talked a little bit that day about several models for budgeting. One of the models that's very appealing to me is one that focuses more on expenses and tracks expenses. They don't track expenses, they just track budgeting. So for me, that actually has to take place before this dialogue to say, what is the best method for us to use, and to do a little bit more exploration of the different type of budgeting things out there before you take a course on the one we saw.
But we're just talking about how we spent the money. I think we're missing how it's tied into our priorities and our goals, and where is it moving the needle closer to where we want to go, right? So that's where I think this focuses on how getting the information that we need to make good decisions. First of all, being able to get the information that we need, and then being able to see how that ties into and furthers the goals of the city. And I think those are important. Those are important indicators, as opposed to just how we spent the money or just what the expenses are. And there's been a desire, from budget committee members and in our discussions for more information. And I realize right now it's very difficult to get information with the current system the way it is. And so that's probably the question.
Mayor, what is the difference between program budgeting and product budgeting? Because when you're in the private sector, you have a product. You know what you spend on it, you know what you get back from it. So is the accounting system so different in city accounting that we couldn't know what the product is, which is a program, and what we spend on that product and what the resulting...
You're talking about in today's world. Yeah, so the problem in today's world is a complex software system that's been developed over time that doesn't talk to each other. So the cost of asphalt, we're paying for asphalt, doesn't talk to the program that accumulates the hours for putting that asphalt together. So for us to answer a question, we go to, it's not a dashboard that we can put together, okay, that pulls all this information.
It's understandable.
Okay, and that's why the upcoming Provo 360 software gives us, that's one of the goals of this software is that we could answer those questions like good business would be able to answer.
But I think that needs to be written in initially, right, into the software to be able to produce those kinds of reports. So it's not that you're just going to get those kind of reports after the fact. They would have to be written into the software, the capabilities to be able to do that. And that's where the expense comes, I think, is trying to tailor it to the individual department's needs once you get this large package, from the way I understand it. Mr. Purdy?
Just looking at number 4, desired outcomes, a history of expenditures. I think that's what the mayor was getting at. That's also something I picked up on that Park City presentation is wow, okay, you budget it this way, but you track expenses that way.
That's what you do.
I think that's a huge hole, and I think that's actually what the budget committee is asking for is a way to tie that. Okay, we said this is what we're budgeting, but how did we actually spend that money? I think we're all kind of on the same page there. And I'd like to put a plug in for what I called performance management, and I think on this one it's called oversight. But that's also something that I was introduced to through the budgeting for outcomes information was performance management. Not only like what did we spend on that program, which Park City can't do, but what Park City seems to be able to do, and just assumed that we had was a way not just to track what do we spend on it, but what was the impact of the money that was spent. And so I think that all of this, but I guess to me, all of these pieces need to come together, and we just need to make sure, and whether it's however we do it, that we just ask, we say these are the kind of things we're looking for, and then turn it over to the administration and say, as Provo 360 is getting put into place, please ensure that these type of answers are gonna come out. It sounds like that's what some of the main objectives are, is for that dashboard information back. But just make sure that we're all on the same page, so we don't get to the end and realize, oh well, we didn't implement it the way that we would need to in order to get that information. Just verify that I think it's great that we're communicating this is what we're looking for, and then turn it over to them to make sure that kind of information.
I want to set expectations too, because we have a number of departments that are hoping certain features will be built into the software, and they don't know. Not everybody's going to get what they want out of the software, and so it is good to know this. We can ask the questions, but the expectations, it's still going to have some limitations. And certain things are going to be prioritized ahead of others that we can get immediately, and some can get later.
So I think that's actually a performance indicator. If we can add that, what Mr. Harding said, is that there's a focus. It's when putting those, when initiating the 360, the Provo 360, that I guess that's not to rephrase that. The Provo 360 software is capable of producing the necessary reports. And then, as the mayor said, we can look at that indicator and see, how well does the software provide the information that we need.
Can you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah. So right now we have a number of services that we charge for in the city. We have lots of different programs. And if you listed them all, I'm not sure what the number would be, whether we're talking 150 or 200. I mean, and this kind of goes back to what Wayne says, how fine do you want to break anything out? And what I would propose this year is that we
tell the administration what our top priorities are, that we want, let's say the top 10, whatever, and say, in order for us to better understand at the end of this year how these programs were being affected by the budget and what the outcomes were and what we accomplished by what we spent, I would look for a recommendation from the administration saying if you, we would review and give you like 15 or 20 programs or things that are related to your goals, because of all the things in the universe, only some of them relate to your goals. And I'd like to know how many they feel they would need to report to us and at what level in order to give them and us an idea of what we're getting for the money and whether there's an appropriate relationship between our budget and how we're performing as a city, what we're doing.
For this year.
So
Yeah.
let me clarify though, are you talking about this council's goals or the city's long-term goals?
Well, you could do it both ways.
Let me tell you why that's sort of true. Because your goals are changing.
Right.
And the budget doesn't move that quickly. And so that's what I heard from Park City was, this is about 3 or 4 long-term goals and how we're navigating towards those.
Well, I would like to think that if someone asked me on my personal budget at home, how much do I spend on transportation? Well, okay, I can give them a general number, but say, okay, how much do you spend on tires or oil changes? There are certain levels that I personally keep track of, and then it gets difficult. That's what I want to know. Is we don't want this to be so difficult unless there's a really compelling reason to go down deeper into the budget or into the weeds. But we do want some transparency so that people can say, well, there's all these programs and some of them are more effective than others. What's the bang for the buck? What are you getting? So where's the accountability?
Just say hypothetically that this was totally adopted and we were all in agreement on this. And so if you just say, okay, well, zoning compliance, we need to make some modifications to the 2017 budget to meet that goal. And we probably need help from the council to find additional funding sources to do it. The development of the approval process, we probably don't need to make this probably not a budgetary issue. The general plan update, probably not new staff, but the council may need to evaluate their staff on that one. Housing. So my point is that if you were to go through these, some of them are really not budget related. Some of them are council's budget, not administration's budget. And so that's why these are going to change. You're going to reprioritize these, and they're going to be different goals. And our budget doesn't move that quickly. It's not that flexible. So we can respond to these and propose to you what budget is needed to do some of these, if any at all. And that's, I think, what we need to do on zoning enforcement. But it doesn't impact long-term budgeting, unless there's something coming along here that's significantly different.
It occurred to me that you missed the first part where we did discuss that these goals, some will fall clearly in administration's purview. There are some that will be our council staff that will then bring it to the council. But some of these will be resolved by committee. Some of these will be resolved by like the council member who finds it important, but it's not a council priority. So there will be various groups different groups that will address all of these. This is not a list that we're giving to just the administration.
10 to 20% at most involved in the budget.
Right. And
could you respond to those?
That require a budget?
Require the budget, yeah.
Well, the zoning compliance is probably the first and foremost.
Right.
And I think that we will in terms of the budget.
Yeah.
But be prepared, because part of that is the ask of the council to find more revenue.
Or take it from somewhere else.
Or take it from, and where?
and that's where prioritizing becomes very important.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the crux of what we're getting at, is when we have the priorities set, when we understand the priorities of the departments, when we understand the priorities of the city, it's easier for the council then to look at some of those things and give feedback on some of those things. When we understand what the priorities are, not just our own priorities, but what your priorities are, what the department's priorities are, it's easier to make those decisions. And we're not just guessing at, you know, what would be.
I think I'm just asking for more clarification between talking long-term citywide policy priorities that don't change from year to year.
Yes.
Or are we talking priorities that change?
No.
12 months or 6 months?
Budgeting priorities would be, we would come up with visioning, and that's what I came up with some just possible vision statements in our retreat, and that's the direction that I think this takes you in, is you have those 4 or 5 overarching visionary goals that this process takes you to, right? But it also helps in the year to year. It helps us make decisions because we understand what the priorities are moving forward. And I know that this isn't going to be it's not going to be done for this budget cycle. It's not going to be maybe even done for the next budget cycle. But the fact that we're moving in that direction and we're putting into place something that gives us those tools to make better decisions is really what this is all about.
Yeah, and then I don't want to dominate this, but I'll come back because I'm still not clear which direction it will. We've heard the City presentation, but to me that's a sliver of the possibility out there.
Right, and I guess that's where we leave it up to you. These are the things we would like to see, and if you find another program that gets us these reports, that gets us the information that we need to make those decisions, then that's completely up to you. If there's another program that offers those options, gets us the information that we feel like we need, then I don't know what would be Mr.
Sarah, you talk about long-term goals. I think zoning enforcement, at least in my 2 campaigns for council, has been the top priority of many neighborhoods. It wasn't when I was mayor. I don't remember it. Of course, maybe my memory's not good anymore. But I think that's a long-term goal that the city should have, like Park City has its goals, that people can feel comfortable with the zoning that is being enforced in their neighborhoods. So I think that is a long-term goal, one that's not going to change. At least it hasn't changed with me in those 2 campaigns that I've run.
I think what you more likely see is a long-term goal that says strong neighborhoods.
Yeah. And zoning enforcement is certainly a part of that.
It's very specific.
Right. It's a very specific goal within that strong neighborhoods. Yeah. Because I don't think you have strong neighborhoods when you don't have zoning enforcement. I think at least we have people that would tell us that it deteriorates their neighborhoods dramatically when it isn't enforced adequately.
Mr. Stoll? I was just thinking about Mr. Richard's comment about he's not sure what we're asking, and then the mayor saying he's not sure what we're asking him. And I was just remembering our retreat discussion and what little I've been able to learn about budgeting for outcomes. It seems like it's really important that both the council and administration really understand where we're heading. And I was remembering Mr. Harmon's comment too about the time frame. That's a little unclear to me as well. So I guess all I'm saying is this may take some time and some education and some developing of understanding on both branches to really figure out the best way to do this. Long term, though, I think the idea of aligning the budget to citizens' priorities is a great direction to be in.
So I'm wondering, listening to this discussion over the past, it's almost 3 o'clock, I don't know how long it's been, but we've been at it for a little bit. I wonder if priority may not have been the best word, maybe project. Just a quick example on here is complete streets. So complete streets, with the idea behind that is we've talked about complete streets and some of our vision documents and whatnot. There's been people have brought up, should we have an official complete streets policy? So for me, as
out campaigning, listening to what people are concerned about. I put on my to-do list complete streets. So if this was something that was adopted, whether it's, we call it a project priority, but the idea behind this is form a committee or assign staff or ask the administration, but a group gets together, investigates this a little bit, says, should we have a complete streets policy or no? You know, and that is decided up front. That's something that the committee or the group, whatever, looks into. Should we have it? And if so, what's the best wording for it? You know, what's worked elsewhere? That kind of thing. So that one, I think that one, because that's simple. For the budgeting to priorities, to me again, I'm not certain that we need to have everything spelled out here, because hopefully all this is saying we feel that this is something we want to look at. This is something we want to investigate. Maybe we could even go so far as saying that, you know, at this point it's the council's opinion that in a short amount of time that the city should be using some sort of priority-based budgeting, and then we organize a group to look at it to determine for Provo City what's the best and what's the best time frame to implement it and what's the best kind of reports that we're going to get out of it, kind of thing. And so just at high level, we just say, as a council, we feel it's important that sometime very soon we start looking into this and getting it going.
Well, we've done that. We have a budget committee. We have experts, like world-renowned expert on our budget committee board. And so this is the information that having gone through this process for 2 years, these are the things that are lacking. These are the things that we would like to see in the budget that helps us make better decisions. We're going to have the budget committee help us as we've commissioned them to do. Then this is the information that is necessary to help inform the council and help the council make our best decision once it comes to us. So it's not, I don't think we need to create anything. We have an amazing resource, and these are the things that have come up over the last 2 years that have been difficult to achieve. One, because of our system, it's discombobulated, doesn't communicate, and it is difficult and arduous to produce those reports. And so I think, if anything, the budget committee, we want something that produces the kind of reports that we need, the information that we need to make a decision, and as the budget committee, be able to inform the council as we've commissioned them to do, or asked them to do.
I agree with all of that. I wonder if then what we would be adopting today would just be saying that we want to continue this, and the kind of detail that's here maybe shouldn't be on the priority sheet, but should be at one of, it's one of the outcomes, or it's one of the indicators, whatever. It's one of the products of what. And so by approving this today, we'd be saying this is still something we want to pursue. So we wouldn't be hashing out the details of it right now.
We need to go through the rest of it. But I think, and I think it was for clarity too, because I know that for the administration or for our staff, they do want some clarity on what it is we're asking. And so I think for those reasons, we did list, these would be desired outcomes. These are the types of things that we would like to see in a budget report to be able to make a decision. And so that's
one of the things I want to clarify too. I understand the asks, Dave. I do not understand what is required to get the answers to those asks.
Right.
That's
right.
what
And that's where the administration would come back and they would say, look, if this is the information that you need, this is where it's going to take us to get it. And then we can make the decision then. Okay, how high of a priority, how much do we want to put into this to be able to get the information that we need. But this is some guidance, and the administration will come back to us and let us know what it will take and what the best route they think to get there, in consulting with their finance team and how they could produce those kinds of reports. They can come back to us, let us know what that would take, and we could make decisions at that point.
And maybe the staff can help by pulling out of our priorities the budget priorities. If there's only 4 or 5 of those that are budget priorities, let's separate those into a separate listing. If that would help. I think there aren't many.
There's that one in infrastructure, and infrastructure, was part of.
It's a budget priority because how much money are we going to put into it?
Right, and so I feel like
rates for the water is they want to go year by year.
Right, and I feel like that falls under budgeting to priorities, because is it a priority of the council? Is infrastructure a priority of the council? Has been, and I think continue to be, but I kind of saw it under that, budgeting
So it would
priorities.
be helpful to the
Right along
administration
with
maybe to pull out the ones that are budget priorities. Because certainly many of them are. I'd rather do it very limited with budgeting.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree with George. I look at this list and I'm going, wow, if I was the mayor, how would I ever report how all the things the city's doing is doing currently support these various things? And some of them, only some of them, should be pulled out and say, because this is a little, I think it'd be a little difficult.
But what's the intent of this? I mean, housing is on here. We've already started the process, so I mean, again, I think this is more of a reaffirmation. This is something we want to continue. It's not necessarily something specific for to be put into the budget, but it's something that we're studying and looking at. So, again, what is the purpose? To me, this was not like a here, mayor, please budget for this. It was these are the things that we want to spend our time on this year. You know, these are kind of the proposal things we want to accomplish.
Larry?
I thought the council had already identified 4 priorities. Am I not understanding that?
Yeah,
correctly?
we had 4 areas of priorities. Those were our four areas, and this is kind of this was more specific, getting a little more specific within each of those 4.
I think the mayor is right.
areas.
I think the budget needs to be structured with those 4 priorities in mind. And then the list that you have here, to the extent that there are budget implications, may be an emphasis in a particular year or 2, but the overall budget should be continue to be focused on those 4 major priorities.
Right. So vibrant community,
healthy environment, thriving commerce.
Yeah.
So I think what the intent of the budget committee was in putting this document together was to say, not to what extent is your program supporting zoning enforcement. It's to what extent is the program supporting vibrant communities and strong neighborhoods, if that's how it is going to get articulated. So it's how is this activity, this cluster of activities that we're calling a program, supporting and furthering the council's goals with regard to those 4 areas. And I think that doesn't seem to me to be an unreasonable question to ask of the departments that are administering programs. To what extent are we building a community around these 4 concepts? And I think the other thing I would observe is you've already commented on the fact that that really getting serious in implementing this will require some adjustments to your information system. It's also going to require some adjustments to your staffing levels. As I think John pointed out a time or 2 ago, the 1 budget officer or 1.5 budget people may not be enough to support the activity to the level of specificity that you need and want in order to make the kinds of decisions. So I would be prepared to look carefully at your investment in information systems and also your personnel needs.
Okay, so can we go on to the next item on the housing?
Do we have consensus? I really like what you had to say about
Yeah, I agree.
focusing on these. How do you feel, Mayor?
I think that's what I'm saying.
So, and that's part of this document.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add to that is, I think you'll sense some pushback if you define the method for providing that information. I don't think I've come to terms with myself that that's method yet.
I think that was what, the document was more to provide what kind of information you're looking for, and wanted to make sure that we're specific enough about the kind of information, and yet the vehicle that you get there, how you get to that point would be entirely up to you, administration. Okay, so next, is there anything else? And appreciate Larry, appreciate you being here and part of that, representing the budget committee. Is there any other comments before we move on to housing? Okay. So housing is the next item. We can pull that one up. And the next item is the comparables.
I didn't quite get that.
Sorry. Okay, so housing. Was there anything we wanted to add to this desired outcome, sufficient housing for people desiring to live in Provo, and the housing type they desire, ability for residents to stay in the area they want to live, even as their housing needs change, mixture of housing types throughout the community while respecting the unique character of the different areas of the city, reduce pressure on single-family housing to be used as short-term housing, more affordable family housings. And then the indicators would be below that. We can scroll down. Oh, let's see. There's more. So increased average tenure of Provo residents, increased number and diversification of household income ranges within neighborhoods, increased number of family households in the neighborhoods originally built for family occupancy, increased long-term student enrollment at local elementary schools, decreased rental tenure citywide, and increased ratio of rental tenure countywide, decreased housing costs, resident satisfaction survey, increase in the range of affordable housing options for all income groups.
A question, sorry. What decreased housing costs? I don't know that, I'm not sure that we want that, and I don't think the residents want that.
I don't know if that goes along with the fact that what we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
the hyperinflation of homes because
But
of
to
over
state
occupancy.
that we want to decrease the home values in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Not necessarily-
Probably clarify that unless someone else had another definition.
What about increased affordability? Does that say something?
Was that the intent of the original statement?
I like that better.
Please read.
I'm fine with the different wording, but I have come across several people who are renting. They would love to stop renting. They would love to buy. Their families are started families. They want to live in Provo, but they can afford to rent, but they can't afford to buy. And you know, they can't afford to buy the house that they're renting at the moment. So.
The council has had programs to help those people in the past, and that's one thing we probably need to look at. We'll continue with that.
So I like the idea of affordable, making it more affordable rather than decreasing.
Okay, yeah. So we could change that to more affordable housing options or more affordable housing options.
I'm comfortable with that. That's hard. I do think that is an issue that we have with our housing right now.
Okay. Any other questions?
So going back up to the outcomes, I'm just wondering, did we have in there something where we end up assessing whether it be neighborhood by neighborhood or just where in the city we need certain types of housing, whether it be senior housing or student housing or any kind of, because right now we're doing the Franklin neighborhood, and the demographics there show there's very few seniors living in the neighborhood. And if we want to have housing in that neighborhood or in that vicinity for all demographics, do we want to address that? Is that a problem or an issue?
I think it is in there, a mixture of housing types throughout the community. Or ability for residents to stay in the area they want to live. Is it not encompassed in those, some of those
Kind of,
outcomes?
it's just that,
There's something else that you
know,
wanted to say.
do we have a clear vision of where we want to put the different types of housing in Provo, where it's needed? Kind of like right now we focus on where we want to add retail or business that creates jobs. So where is it in the past we talked about putting the higher density stuff on main corridors. And that's just kind of a catch-all, you know, that kind of rule of thumb. But it doesn't always apply. And so as we go forward, we can look at it neighborhood by neighborhood, or we can look at it holistically as a city and say, and we're dealing with this with the low-income housing tax credits. You know, HUD wants us to spread it out,
And realistically, if you're gonna do that, where are the possibilities? If we want other communities in this valley to do that, that's a tall order because we can't make them do anything.
But we can have influence on that with home dollars and with some of those things,
Well,
with allocating them in other cities and those, there are some tools that are disposable for
And we need to look at
influencing.
that, but having a better handle on where we are lacking, we talk about missing middle or whatever kind of housing we might be lacking. And I want to know how much we're lacking and where.
Okay. Is that part of this or is that part of, yeah, so how much are we lacking and where?
Well, in order
We're going to
to,
add that as an expected outcome. So understanding how much.
how about sufficient housing in the right places for people?
What about the mixture of housing types throughout the community while respecting the unique character of different areas? I'm wondering if that's, or can we tweak that one to get it more in line with what you're, is it possible to tweak it or do we need to create it?
Well, I'm not, the outcome is fine. I just wonder if we're going to, how we're going to evaluate it and who's going to quantitatively say we have 1,000 units of this and 500 units of that, and we need something in this number and in this quantity in a certain place.
I think those maps are very telling. I think the demographic maps that Mr. Taylor sent us are very telling when you see the concentration of subsidized and low income and in Provo, and yet it's really not dispersed throughout the county at all. Right. And so we really don't have a balanced mix of housing here. We have a concentration of housing types here. And so I think those maps could be an indicator. And I think, didn't we put that on here as an indicator of seeing that it's more balanced rather than large concentration in Provo and really not anywhere else throughout the county? And maybe we could add that as an indicator that those, what are they called? Those maps that you sent us that show the demographic maps showing a better disbursement of housing types.
I like that.
Is disbursement a word? I don't know. We could maybe take out the E and see if it right there.
Dispersal.
Dispersal. Yeah, dispersal. Thank you. Get my English straight. Okay. So anything else to add to this one? All right, let's move on to structured policy. And this was this is one to be able to understand where all of our documents are, how they're. I think there's this is Mr. Harding's suggestion of an understanding of our policy instruments, including terminology, clearly defined locations of city policy. So when you go on the website, you can clearly find where's our council handbook on our council webpage. What policies are still active, which ones are inactive, where, like a compilation of these somewhere where we can go to and that the public can go to and easily find what policies are still in place, what policies are, anyway, just having an updated repository of our council policies.
So we recently got that document, the cross-reference guide based on the Vision 2030, which is probably not 100% complete. It might change over time. I asked if we could include the rest of the implementation measures in Chapter 13. And it doesn't include any of the 278 action steps in Vision 2030, which if you go on to our regular city website, you won't find those. So where do you put them and how do you access them? And do they apply? And which departments are looking at those, if anybody?
Yeah, I think that would, for me, trying to navigate our website is challenging. You click on a picture and it doesn't take you anywhere, and then you click on where it says read more underneath the picture, and then it describes what the picture means, but it doesn't take you to the budget documents, or it doesn't take you where you want to go, right? And I recently had this young kids group who were doing this presentation on sanitation, on recycling, And they said, so if you want to find out about how to recycle bottles in Provo, you go from this to this to this to this on the Provo website to this, and then you find it on the mayor's blog. And so it was, and they in one step identified the issues with trying to find information on our website, and that it's even for me sometimes struggle to find information. So I think if there were on our council webpage all the relevant links that we could just go to the council webpage and find all the relevant documents. And be able to pull them up there rather than having to find them in our emails or find them, on different sources. I think having that structure in place is really, really important for our ease and for the citizens' ease of finding information and having it be very user friendly.
On my rewrite, I had 2 additional desired outcomes. At least one of these doesn't sound like my words, but I think I pulled them from other discussion or whatever, but after those 3, I also had sensible structure to city policy and clean up city code. That was something that had been suggested.
This is something that the mayor brought to our attention too, is what policies are still in effect. I think a cleanup, a general cleanup is important.
I think cleanup of city code, I think there's been at least some discussion previously that some of our code is out of date. We haven't gone through and then a kind of a cleanup or we have, I think, done some efforts of cleanup, but there's still more to do, and if it becomes a high enough priority, maybe we put more resources into it.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. We discussed the West Side plan. We want to say more about that. No. And then infrastructure. Talked a little bit about maintaining infrastructure.
Well, I'm sorry, Kim. The West Side plan, as I start looking at that, I'm just really concerned. I start to see what Parks and Rec is asking for example, go to their board meeting and they say there's only 2 or 3 spots on the west side. If we want to have a regional sports facility, there's only 2 or 3 spots on the west side that are even available.
What's the West Side plan document?
And also I start looking at where we're putting all the roads in, main roads here. Are we putting those, the roads are there. What are we hoping for around those roads? We're getting several developments that are going onto the west side, and we're here and there and here and there. And I wonder if we need to really focus. I don't know if this becomes we're working on the general plan, I understand that. But does this become more of an urgent situation? As I listen and hear some of the things that are happening on that west side, I am concerned that our planning is going to become too late if we don't start to.
It's in our top 10.
It is in our top 10.
It has level to the top. So, but do we want to add connectivity, road connectivities, or connectivity, and then also add open space, parks?
Absolutely, I think those are
to the desired outcomes that we know where the connectivity, and then also open space. And do open space and parks are those separate? Because we talked about having preserving green space.
It's agricultural separate as well.
Preserving agricultural, preserving green space, conserving park space.
Recreation facilities.
Yeah, sorry. So agriculture, green space, and parks.
Agriculture.
Sure you want to leave agriculture in there?
That's what we were asking.
Are we really going to leave agriculture on the west side?
That's what the People's Lobby suggested, and to me, again, this is kind of at the point where I don't think we need to nail down all of these things. I think this just kind of gives kind of a mission statement to whatever body's going to delve into this.
Right, and we could also say assessing citizen interest in preserving green space agriculture, or citizen interest, or I don't know what's a desired outcome. No, it's not really an outcome. We could say preserving green space agriculture and parks per citizen desire, or something like that.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with that generally, that almost all of these desired outcomes should be assessments of, that this is kind of what we're thinking of. We just need to assess the viability and the desirability of these things. And that's why we want to look into it.
If you want some agricultural land in West Provo and we put this in here and they want to develop it, they're going to say the council's not going to vote for that because they want to maintain agricultural space in lieu of development in that same space.
So maybe in some places we want agriculture, maybe in some places we want green space, maybe in other places we want to develop commercially. And I think that depending on, the location too, there may be a desire to preserve some agricultural ground.
So let me say this just a little bit clearer, maybe this makes more sense. I'd say that I hope that there's no expectation, there's no misunderstanding, or at least the way I see it, that if we adopt any of these priorities, that we're not setting city policy. We're just saying that this is what the council wants to look into. And then from looking into this stuff, then we will set city policy. But I hope that there's no expectations that what we're voting on today sets that policy, just that we're going to look into what the policy should be.
Okay, you're a West Side
But doesn't that say a desired outcome as a council priority is to have preserved agriculture on the west side?
I think we can fix that if we just put in front of that, establish clear policy related to, or something like that.
Okay, you're the West Side guy. Is that okay in there?
In that policy,
It's not my
decision. Maybe that we don't want to.
I mean, if we made that decision, I mean, I don't.
So if we're thinking that anything that's in those desired outcomes is now, official city policy, I think I would want to go back through all 9 that we've already gone through, and because I'm not comfortable with all of those desired outcomes. I think those were these are the reasons that we're looking into it, so I don't know if we need to change the template. So at the top of this is establishing clear policy about : and everything below. But yeah, I hope we're not thinking that we're establishing policy at this point. It's just the priorities of things we want to look into. But again, that's how I see this, and other people see this.
I guess it depends on who's reading it and what intent is the read.
We're establishing our goals and our priorities right now. We're establishing what we would like to see happen. Whether it's not going to happen necessarily in these ways, but there will be things.
But your comment, Kim, is we're establishing what we would like to see happen. So is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
So we'd like to see agriculture space reserved in the west side.
Yeah. So what we would like to see happen is west side development. That we make a focus on west side development, and some of these might change, just like some of these when we were talking about the development approval process. Some of those may change when you get into committee, but what we're saying is west side, having a plan for the west side is a focus of the council. Some of these desired outcomes might change as we sort of, figure out what's going on, but at least it gives us like a kind of a starting point.
Right.
These are the desired outcomes right now. Those could change a little bit, but our overall goal is let's have a plan. Let's make sure that we're planning for that area. And I think the bigger thing here is the total prioritization of all of these things, right? Then we're sort of fleshing it out a little bit so that staff has an idea where we're going, administration has an idea where we're going, but really what I would like to do is what we've done. We prioritize these. And I'd like to know, does this priority meet the council's expectations? The way these are prioritized, do we feel comfortable with this priority? If we can just get that part of the day, I'd be feeling like we're really headed in the right direction. And then we can go back and we can flesh these out as we go too. But is this? I think maybe that might even be the better direction. Is this the right order of priorities? Does it make sense? Does it make sense what you thought when you filled out that survey? Does this list of priorities make sense? Is there anything sort of an outlier there that you're like, oh, that was really a high priority? You know what I mean? Or that wasn't a really high priority and maybe it should go down a little bit on the list? I don't know. maybe that's a better discussion to have right now because we'll have to flesh these out a little bit as we go anyway. So, Mr. Knapp.
Okay, so you brought up kind of two things there. Earlier I said, maybe we combine some of these so that we accomplish both with just one heading. I don't necessarily want to neglect, clear vision it's a great concept, and if we can incorporate that into another one, great. As far as these things that we've looked at, the outcomes, generally I've been okay with the outcomes, otherwise I would have said something. Right now, when we talk about the west side, I understand the concern that all of a sudden we're advocating saving agricultural land or incentivizing farmers to stay farming. That's really not the discussion right now. I think what we're trying to do here is follow up on the People's Lobby recommendation, that we actually look at it and have a policy decision made in the future. And that's exactly what was put on there, as we establish some clear policy. That doesn't say what the policy is. It might say we're doing nothing. But at least we're going to.
So the emphasis then is on establish the policy.
Absolutely.
I'm okay with the wording now. The wording's great now because we need to establish a policy.
Yeah.
The wording before to me established a policy, but now we're talking about doing it.
I think it depends on how we use it. I just see things in the 2030 where people start to use the 2030 document as a weapon rather than a vision. And if we use these things as a weapon rather than a vision, we get ourselves in trouble.
And I clearly think these are a vision. But I also think it's important to the overall importance is where, as a council, where do we find the most congruence on our goals? And it's obviously zoning compliance number one, right? And if anyone feels like that's not number one, then let's talk about that. And then the development approval process. As we look at this list, this is how it shook out when we identified our priorities. And so maybe it's better just to say, do we, as far as this list goes, do we feel like this accurately reflects what we would like it to reflect? And then I think we're gonna have to come back at a later date and decide, who can take what priority, how will that be moved forward? And that can be a later discussion where maybe there's something on there that only have one council member interested in it. Then they would say, you know what, that's mine, and I'll take that one, right? But I think we later find out how do we move these things forward and whose purview does it fall under. But for now, maybe we could just come to, is there anything on this list, in the order of this list, that that you feel is sort of an outlier or doesn't really kind of make sense according to the discussion that we had?
So I have an opinion on that. We all rank these differently, so I think we would all maybe reorder the list a little bit. Of the ones at the point we've gotten to so far, it seems like a pretty good aggregation of everybody's priorities to me. So,
as long as we do it as an aggregation of everybody's priorities and don't do it individually, because I think we do have different priorities. And to say that the council is going to, it depends on how we present it to the public. Because my priorities are not 1 through 10 here. Just
right.
And
no,
so,
and I wasn't trying to say that. I'm just saying, is there something really way out there that all of us could agree on, this kind of way out there? Otherwise, I like the fact that it was random, that we all did our own thing and we put it together and this is what we came up with. Is this list something that we can agree upon? Is just the ranking of the priorities that we can agree upon, that is where we will focus, and then we can get more into fleshing out. And I think we should have more discussions about what this looks like, what the sort of our cover page looks like, and then assign who's going to follow through with those priorities at a later date.
So I wasn't comfortable with a couple of them because they weren't fleshed out. I'll ask the question here, and I'm not sure who wants to answer. Maybe Matt would answer for me, or anybody else. The one for zoning overhaul wasn't fleshed out. So as part of that, are we looking to adopt form-based code, or what do we mean by zoning overhaul?
I don't think it's been defined. I think like the document needs to be fleshed out. I don't think it means any particular approach. It means, this is just my interpretation of discussion I've heard the council talk about previously, that there seems, especially from that zoning discussion, seems to be some structural issue with our code that needs to be identified and some alternative possibly put forward to correct that. That's just the discussion I've heard. Whether that's what the council would like to do is for you to get your arms around.
Okay, so I put that kind of low because
Undefined.
Yeah, undefined.
And it looks like many of us did, because it's more to 18 out of 25, because maybe it wasn't fleshed out.
I could see, if we decide that this is a project that we want to take on, the first step is, again, whether it's staff or a committee or whatever, a group gets together and looks at it and says, do we need a zoning overhaul? What are the current deficiencies in our zoning? How does it compare to best practices and maybe similar cities around us? And do we feel, after looking at this, do we feel like, hey, our zoning is actually in pretty good shape and we just need a few tweaks here or there, or, man, we would need an overhaul? And so, again, just by adopting it as I started calling them projects instead of priorities, but by adopting it, I don't think necessarily it says that it's the city's policy that we're going to overhaul our zoning. It's we want to look into this and see if it's a good idea.
Really we're about 40 minutes over, but what if we just adopted the first 8 that we talked about so far? Because I don't know how we'll get through the rest of these today. And if we could agree that those 8 are our priorities in the order they're listed here, maybe that would be a starting point for today.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Is there a second? No, all in favor?
A little discussion.
A little discussion, yes.
I think we ought to start somewhere. That's a place to start, and look at those 8 and say, what's going to take in the way of money and effort, and how can we accomplish that as soon as possible, and then move down to the next tier when we can, and just keep moving down the list of projects so that we try to address as many as possible.
And I think the discussion is a little bit longer on these first few because they are of high importance to us, and we want to make sure that we have the same understanding going forward. And I think that as we go down the list, it's going to get a little easier to figure those out, questions out, because they're not as involved as these first 8. But
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, we have one motion. Are you making a substitute motion? There was a motion to approve the first 8 that we've already discussed.
Okay, I didn't do that, sorry.
Would you like to make, then there was a second.
Okay, I would like to just amend that motion to consolidate number group outreach and general communications. And just cut down on the number, maybe drop the last couple. I can't believe there were many more than 1 or 2. But I'm fine to just go ahead with it. I'll make a separate motion now. I won't amend the motion.
You want to amend it? Okay.
And just one point of clarification, my thought is due to time today that we would address the next 17 in another session.
So we'll move back to our next work session. That's part of your motion. Okay. And any more discussion? All in favor? Thank you. That's the voting is unanimous in the affirmative. Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll skip. The next topic was to compare goals with the mayor's goals and priorities, but we didn't quite get through all of our goals. So as soon as we do that, Mayor, we will. You kind of have been doing that as we go.
No, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time. Let me just pass out a copy I have of them before we can find it for reference.
Okay, and then we'll discuss them. We definitely will get there.
Yeah, I know I'm not really good about it.
Okay. Thank you. So let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll start again.
just wanted to show through.
Okay.
Can I have one of those?
Yes, I just.
Glad you did. Can we get started again, Louise? Are we?
Yes, we're ready.
We get live?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next item of business, which is the discussion on the ad hoc housing committee by our executive director, Matthew Taylor.
Thank you. Just a very brief update. And it still seems that housing is a priority on your list, and they have moved down a little bit in ranking, but our intention as staff is to continue research and development of that. One of the proposed ways to flesh out housing issues was to bring together a ad hoc committee of professionals or citizens or a combination of such to discuss the general issues and give you some feedback. We solicited 4 suggestions. I recognize everyone's been very busy with the priorities discussion, and so I understand that you haven't had an opportunity to give much thought to it. So alternatively, we put forward a list of suggestions with no actual recommendations here, just possibilities of people that could be invited at this point and have not actually been contacted. And, if you have feedback, please move. We can either discuss if you'd like to formalize any of the suggestions, or if you'd like to have some additional time to provide feedback and finalize that list at a later time. So I'm just wanting to help that move forward the best way that we see fit.
Any questions or comments, Mr. Taylor?
Let me ask someone. Do we have a list? Where would I find that list?
I'm sorry, I think it was on public documents. And if not, I apologize.
Agenda
Let me distribute that again. I just want to keep you appraised that, you know, we can move this forward. We'll send that out again. No action needed at this time.
Thank you. The next item is the council rules policy evaluation. Items referred to the planning commission to work meeting. What does that mean? Sorry.
That was, I'll give an overview.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Let me pull it up here.
Oh, okay. I remember what this is.
The leadership raised a concern about the current agenda setting process for land use issues. Several years ago, the council adopted a policy on how to regulate the inclusion of land use issues on the agenda. My recollection of the discussion those years ago was that there was a desire to see a more efficient council process and more predictability. And out of that was born this policy. Let me open it up. That reads, items referred from the Planning Commission, commonly referred to as land use items, are issues where the council has received a recommendation from the Planning Commission. In order to provide predictability for land use applicants, recommendations are placed in the next available council work meeting after receipt of the Planning Commission's report of action. Land use items are also immediately noticed per the required 14-day noticing period for a public hearing for the following council meeting agenda prior to the work meeting. So if we put on a work session and simultaneously notice it for a council meeting, and even though statutorily the city has a 14-day requirement, practically because of the newspaper requirements, it's about 21-day lead time. So we have about 3 weeks of lead time on public noticing. These items require no motion from the council advancement from work session to the council meeting agenda. And if a concern arises regarding the application, the council may elect to continue the item for further review and discussion at the council meeting agenda. So again, that's the policy. We followed that policy fairly strictly, that once we receive them, it goes on the work session agenda, and we automatically publish them. Always for the council meeting 3 weeks or 4 weeks out. Always with the understanding that the council can't continue those items at the meeting if additional information is needed. So I turn back to Chair Santiago to express her thoughts on this.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. So this can sometimes become a challenge when items are just automatically put on our agenda. And I know that we had a couple of really, really long meetings, and the mayor and Wayne both talked about the fact that those long meetings, you know, it's not just us, it's the city staff, and it's all the people that have to wait, you know, and you know, for their item to come. And there are some issues with being able to allow time to discuss those. And we always have the option of continuing those items, but as a practice we haven't done that. And so as we're looking at the agenda, it made more sense to me to find out what those land use items are and be proactive in putting them on our agenda, as opposed to being reactive to finding them on our agenda. And being able to manage the time, because land use items typically take more time, more discussion, and I think we do a fairly good job of allowing the right amount of time for certain items, but we can do better if we have control over the agenda. Right now we don't have control over the agenda because these items just come. They're noticed and they appear on the agenda. And so being able to, we meet weekly, we meet you know, every other week with administration, being able to coordinate those. And I don't think it's going to be a problem. We'll probably be able to keep that same sort of flow, but we'll be able to adjust it a little bit better and more proactively rather than reactive to what's coming and not being able to manage it as well.
I have a little concern with that is determining, because we've already expressed saying we want to be able to make this process as predictable as possible. We turn it over to leadership or whoever it is at the time and leave it up to their judgment. I know in the past we've had council leaderships that have not been wanting to have certain audits come to a council meeting. And so they go, well, we'll put it on maybe 6 weeks or time. And I just don't want to, I don't mind it being there. You know, if it's statutory, he says go ahead and do it, that's our job. I just want to get in and let's get to work and get it done. And I just don't want to have the option of arbitrarily postponing something.
Right, but then we still have the problem of when it is on the agenda and we do have city staff there and they can be there late into the evening and they start the morning bright and early the next day. So there's still this issue of trying to balance the needs of city staff, trying to balance the needs of our own brains after 8 hours or 10 hours of meetings. And are we doing our best thinking if we're deciding something at midnight and we've been in meetings since noon?
And I understand. And there's trade-offs.
And so being able to manage that a little bit better, I think is important. I'm sorry.
So, just check me if I understand this correctly. Sorry, I'm new. But the idea is Planning Commission makes a recommendation, and the current practice right now, as soon as they make a recommendation, it gets placed on the next work.
As soon as they finalize their report of action. So you've seen your materials report of action, and that's transmitted to our office.
Okay.
It will be placed on the work session agenda for discussion, for introduction, and then for the following council meeting, we'll have a public notice sent out through the required channels, including the paper.
See that again in the next what?
So simultaneously, it gets put on 2 agendas.
Okay.
The upcoming work session and the subsequent council meeting. We will immediately publish the required public noticing for that council meeting at the time that we're doing work session. That allows the lead time and the statutory 2 weeks to be satisfied.
Okay. And so it sounds to me like the advantage of doing this is it shortens the time. You know, for example, if there's something that is non-controversial, it's pretty straightforward. It shortens the amount of time for it to move through the process, which is one of the things we're looking at in our development improvement process. Is how do we shorten the time on the things that don't need a lot of review? But the disadvantage, I think, face value at least, is if we get into that first work session and we say, wow, this is we need some more time on this. It's already been noticed. People may have expectations that they need to come down. When we continue, would we continue right at that work session, or would we wait until the council meeting starts? 80 people are there in the audience to talk about it and say, you know what, we're going to take another 2 weeks on this.
Yeah, the practice has been that the continuance would come at the work session, or sorry, at the council meeting, because once it's noticed for that council meeting, you're obligated to have it on the agenda. Now, a couple of approaches I've seen is not a lot of people there, you recognize you have more time, you just automatically continue it. Or a judgment calls made and say, oh, it seems like a lot of interest. Then we ought to have an initial hearing, hear what people have to say, and then if you still haven't come to a resolution, we continue with that. So, yes.
I just wait and say, I think that's that what you just said that was based on the current policy. And so if the policy was changed, I think one thing I think you could make the motion. I think that what's in the handbook right now could be adapted. So that one of the options is you could make the motion at work session, and even though it's already been noticed, then staff could just update the agenda for the next meeting. So what the agenda says is it lists the item, and then in bold type at the end of the item it says continued to the next meeting.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And that way people wouldn't have to show up.
Yeah.
That's one way to handle it. Another way is, if you look in the handbook, the very previous section about this talks about the standard practice for moving items from work to action, from work session to action. So if you did away with the policy that's in there right now, what would happen is it would then default to the regular policy, which is that when there's a work session, when something's considered a work session, it takes a motion and the majority council vote to move it to the council meeting. The question becomes, then how do you handle the noticing issue? And there's a couple ways I think that you could do that. One is you could actually publish the notice before the work session, so that then the continuance from the work session to the action meeting is just a continuance of that notice. The problem is there's going to be a delay there, because that means there's no longer from the report of action being issued until you actually have the work session, right? The other potential option, just for you to think about, is staff will have to weigh in on how long the newspaper process takes. Part of the reason why why the 2-week period doesn't work is because Provo City Code says it's 14 days. State code only says 10. So it's possible, depending on what staff says, it's possible that we could update the city code to say 10 days, and you might be able to make a motion in the work session and get it on in 2 weeks if that 4-day difference is enough to get it into the paper.
I don't think it makes much of a difference. I think the lead time involves in publishing it to the paper. If you set the meeting, the council meeting day at the time of work session, they'll probably put it out 2 meetings in most instances.
Still make it into the next meeting.
I don't
You're
think
still
so.
getting to 10 days on a Tuesday.
Yeah, just practically.
Okay, so my next question is just trying to understand the pros and cons of both approaches. If we were to do away with the automatic noticing, on average, how much longer of a delay would we be putting on ones that don't need much review? And then, but maybe before we get to that, Matt.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Before we get to that, we do have, I believe, a newspaper industry expert here. Would it be helpful to see if she has any input on the time it takes to notice?
Well, it's considered advertising classified, so typically you only get 3 days, 2 to 3 days.
So Louise is telling me that they publish on Friday, which would meet the 10-day requirement. So the question, and maybe this is the question for Janelle, is if we decided something on Tuesday and notified the paper by Wednesday, would it be published by Friday?
Yes. You could, I believe you could do that. If you work through the classified, I think you're working through classifieds.
You have to make
notices. You just have to call. What you'd have to do is, if you knew the day that you were going to have a notice come through, all you have to do is say, call the paper and say, we're going to have a notice, probably about this long, whatever it is. It's used just like an advertisement is, and they, put you in a certain spot in the paper. But you don't, as long as you, I think it's only 3 days max, because they dummy the papers 2 days before, so we know. That's the term. That's a term. That is a term. From all things that I've done over the 32 years I've been in, it's been a 2 to 3 day lead in any newspaper. That includes Trip, Deseret News, anybody else as well.
And you've probably only got 2 days, because if you're making a decision Tuesday afternoon, I don't know that you can get it to the paper before Wednesday, and then it's got to be in by Friday, and that requires a change to city code.
Right.
So.
10 days or 14.
So. Yes. I'd be concerned about the predictability issue as well, because 80 to 90% of the issues, there's just no reason to delay them. To me, the root of the problem here is that we have a real reluctance to continue things. I think if we had some kind of mechanism, like we see we're going to go past the 10 o'clock, and we're going to, the employees are going to go past the witching hour, that we should be willing to continue a difficult item in that situation, or at least once anyway. And there's some other benefits from that as well. I've had several citizens and neighborhood chairs mention to me that they think on really controversial items that it would be good to have them heard twice. And so this kind of plays into that as well. So what if, I'm just throwing an idea out here, what if we made it easier for the minority to request a continuance? Like say it only takes 2 council members to request a continuance, and then there'd be a one-time continuance. And then the rule would be that it would be automatically continued unless the council voted to suspend the rule. Something like that.
I hate to see anything done by a minority. I think we do a majority council vote on all kinds of things, and all of a sudden start breaking that into a different mode. I think it's parliamentary questionable in my mind.
Well, you can always
because
suspend the rule.
Majority, if majority needs to be continued, the majority's going to want to continue, aren't they?
Well, I guess you maybe be expending a little political capital or something, saying we feel like this is so important that we're going to vote to suspend the rules so that we can continue this. I don't know. It's just one. I'm trying to avoid introducing a delay in every item. I think that would not be good at all.
And Dave, I mean, I don't know if this helps the objective or not, but I think one solution that we've talked about here, and I just want to reiterate, is that to leave the rule as it is. But right now, the last sentence reads, if concerns arise regarding the application, the council may elect to continue the item for further review and discussion at the council meeting agenda. I think you could modify that rule to just say, or at the work session. Just making that change allows you at the work session to, by majority vote, say, we're not going to hear this next time.
And one thing that does bring up is will we know at that work session what our agenda looks like? Because we typically meet on Wednesday, and we don't always know exactly what is on the workflow or the agenda until that meeting, and so we don't really know, is this going to fit? What kind of time frame, do we have for this meeting? And
right, that's a good point.
And comment on that for late meetings. I've expressed this to Kim and Dave. The real burden on city staff to go into midnight. We had 2 almost back to back. And then add to that, at 10 o'clock, you've been there 4.5 hours. How good are we in that environment? And then add to that, what kind of transparency is it conducting business at 12:30 at night? And how many residents are really going to stay with us that long on the issue until the night? I'd also like to throw out this. We would prefer that you go with an additional council meeting. If it's that packed, you could just simply schedule a council meeting the following week. If it's getting to 10 and it's looking at things that need to be resolved, just the staff there. We had, I think on that last one, I don't remember, but I'll bet we had just sitting with,
And I think there's a reluctance to continue something, even if there are 3 or 4 people who have waited from 5:30 till 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night to speak to that one item, and then you continue it. That would be like super frustrating, even if there are just a few people there, or 1 or 2. It gets difficult to continue items, and it's difficult.
I can't remember being on the council when there's been a reluctance to continue an item. It seems like I'm trying to remember a time when the council wasn't wanting to continue an item, but someone on the council had problems going forward.
Well, it's not necessarily that we have problems sometimes.
Well, the first of those 2 very, very long meetings in December, there was an expression of a desire to continue that meeting.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah,
you're right.
So.
In the spirit of continuance, I think we need to continue this item.
Continue this item.
Yeah, because we do need to get to an administrative item, and we need to close it at 4:30. So let's. make a recommendation maybe to send it to the rules committee, to come back with recommendation. Did you have something you want to say?
I was just going to say I'd like to maybe explore some of those time issues because to me, whether that's possible or not, makes a difference. But that can be explored through the rules committee as well.
Would there be a motion along those lines?
Second.
Okay, so the motion is that let's refer this item to the rules committee and come back with recommendations. And that was Dave Soul and George Stewart. So second.
Thank you.
All in favor? Thank you. So that's the vote is unanimous in the affirmative. And the last item is administrative updates. Right, first.
We have one, and to save time, we're just going to hone in on this one. We have to quickly turn the time over to John again to share with you.
Thank you, and I'll try to cover this fairly quickly because I know you're under time constraint. But I want to talk a little about our Provo 360 citywide software solution. We recently, we're getting close to being ready to start the implementation and to sign contracts. And just this past week, we received responses back from bids for financing for the project, and it's kind of put us under a little bit of a time restraint. And so we want to be as open as forthcoming as we can with the council, so that you'll have an opportunity, if you want to review and have further discussions with us, you can do that. And so I think the plan is that in 2 weeks that we're going to come with a presentation, which will be similar to some of the presentation that some of the council members saw in March of this year. We've updated it, and we want to provide all the information to the new council members so they have an opportunity to see and get background on that. But just briefly, what I want to mention today is that the Provo 360 is a citywide software solution. We expect that it's going to provide a 360-degree view for our residents as well as businesses and visitors that will be able to have access to the city, access to our information in one place. It's also expected to enhance the customer experience, improve efficiency, increase transparency, empower stewardship, and promote innovation. Just want to mention that our project team our project executive team consists of Wayne Parker, Travis Ball, myself, Dave Decker, Josh Ivrig, Karen Larson, and Gary McGinn. And we've had a number of meetings where we tried to plan and look at things strategically. The other thing I wanted to mention is we look a little bit at our timeline. This process actually started in January 2013, 3 years ago. And in June of 2013, the council approved an appropriation for $375,000 that was kind of a kickoff start of the project. I would mention to you today that money still has not been spent. It's set aside and planned to be used as part of the cost for this project. We actually sent out an RFQ in August of 2013. We received some responses in October 2013. And then in June of 2014, we kicked off an official RFQ process. And the RFP was released in December 2014. And then last summer, we received the responses. And we've been in the process since then of selecting what we feel like is the best vendor based on a number of criteria that we'll be able to explain to you and talk to you further later. I would also mention that as part of the fiscal 2016 budget that we're in right now, we included funding for this project, and then we included proceeds from funding as well as the actual spend of the funds. So that was anticipated in our current budget. We also included the funding mechanism for the first year, which comes from our enterprise funds as well as the general fund. We set it up so that the energy fund is providing 25% of the funding, public works funds are providing 25%, and the general fund providing 50%. I would say that those percentages are pretty close to the actual benefit for the project. We weren't trying to go after a deep pocket. We're trying to create what we call a fair way of charging the project where it makes sense. We also did in March of this year, we made a presentation and we had all of our key players to the council, and that's the presentation that will be similar next week. I would also mention that the rate that we just received back this week, 1.68% for 7 years, which we were very pleased with. Our original conservative estimates were hoping for 4% or better, and so with the current rate environment, very attractive. It's with Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and the terms are really good, but they have the rate is locked until February 26th, and if we don't close by that date, then we would have to negotiate some new terms, and we feel like the rates are quite favorable, and so we're hoping to take advantage of those.
And that's a rate for what? What are we borrowing money?
We are.
Okay.
Yes. The plan and what we plan for is it's a 7-year tax-exempt lease, and so the funding that's coming from the enterprise funds and the general fund is to service that debt. And what's included in those costs is the cost of the software, and then the cost to implement the software. That's what we're financing.
And that was part of the water bond process, right? With the ERP and the fleet facility, wasn't that part of that? That's different.
No, but it was. We did talk about it as part of the budget process, and we talked about the fleet facility and the funding for that, as well as the Provo 360 or the ERP system.
So that was
Separate financing.
Yep.
Largely because it's a much shorter term.
What is the annual lease cost?
The annual lease, the total cost, the total amount to be financed is $7.7 million. And so it's about a 1.1, between 1.1 and 1.2 million a year. I would also mention, and we'll talk about this more in detail in 2 weeks, but if we were to just do nothing and go on with our existing systems, because of the requirement to upgrade our existing systems, and also because we have some of our systems that are end of life, particularly our utility billing and customer service application, we are in a situation where we have to go to a different system because of sales of the system and acquisition was just challenging. So to do nothing costs us about the same, but yet we have no benefits of integration and all of the great benefits of the big system. And we'll show that on PowerPoint in 2 weeks. We do have our key players here too if you have any questions for them, but I know you're under a time restraint, so.
Okay, thank you. And this was a little preview. We wanted to make sure that if you did have questions that you could ask them in advance, because we will be hearing this at the work session in 2 weeks, and then it will be on our evening council meeting agenda as well. So we just wanted a little preview in case you had questions that you wanted to sort of flesh out before that.
Let me emphasize, if it's not approved in 2 weeks, we miss this financing. That's why we want to give this 2 week window to get in and ask your questions. So hopefully you're comfortable with it too.
We just did open the bids on the financing last week. So this constraint of having to get your approval prior to the 26th of February was new news, and we didn't have time to get it on the agenda for today. Otherwise, we would have done that.
And we have made and I think all the council members, particularly that have been on in the previous term, we've made a big effort to try to keep the council involved and advised and informed on the project and where we're at. So.
So if the cost of not doing it is the same as the cost of doing it, why are we financing it? Does it just open up money for more zoning enforcement?
Well, that's a really good question, okay? Because if we don't do it, then we would need to finance upgrading our current systems and holding it together. We don't have, right now, if we were to do nothing, okay, and just try to get by and not even upgrade what we're at, that cost would be a little bit cheaper, but that would be so scary that we would just have some real concerns about support and where we're at. So when we talk about the cost of not doing it, that's putting in our old system what we feel like would be necessary just to keep it going to where we can sleep at night.
I think the answer is we would have to come to you for some kind of financing if we didn't do anything.
Maybe in smaller tranches and over a longer period of time, but we've still had to come up with
Scott, would you agree with that answer?
Yeah, plus the new system, operating expenses is actually lower than the new one, but you have the upfront cost of the software purchase and implementation. So that's why you have that upfront kind of big need. Whereas your operating costs, then you also have the time frame where you're implementing the software, you have to maintain the software. We have some great models for you. We can go into a lot of detail. And I maybe even point you, if you haven't been there already, we have kept an intranet site up and running called Provo 360, which you can go in, you can see all the information with all the RFPs, process. We list all the news of every event that's happened. So you can take a look at that and feel free to give me a call. If you have not seen that and know how to get to it, I'll probably come up and show you how to get to that information for you next week.
Josh,
internet? No, it's intra. It's working for internal publish. Okay.
Everybody know Josh? You open and gives to Josh.
I think so. I've met all of you swearing me in different sections. So.
He's taught us how to push buttons on the dash.
Yes. That's working well.
It's working well now. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. So thank you, John. Right, Brian?
Yes. There is an item that's been brought forward for closed session. We can talk about this each time, but there is a list of allowed reasons for holding a closed session in state code. There's several reasons in the code, but the three reasons that are applicable to city government are strategy sessions to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, strategy sessions to discuss the purchase or sale of real property, and discussions regarding the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. The item that's been proposed for closed session does fall under those categories and would be appropriate for closed session at this time. Someone would like to make a motion to
go to closed.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Is there a second? Okay, Mr. Connect. All in favor? Thank you. The voting is unanimous. Any affirmative? Thank you.
Down in the other room.
You want to?
Yeah.